A painful scream tore through the air as an overwhelmed warrior bled profusely from his face. An army of red-eyed monsters roared, pouring into the city in a sea of fire. Chaos ensued as soldiers and civilians were mercilessly slaughtered by the monster army. A terrifying explosion blew away a section of the defensive structures, paving the way for the monsters to advance. Two elite warriors, one representing the Empire and one the Dark Forces, clashed in a battle to the death. Eidos, the Empire's swordsman, roared a battle cry, putting all his strength into the attack. Two streams of energy collided violently, with Eidos gradually gaining the upper hand against the Death Knight. A powerful blow struck the Death Knight's helmet, creating an explosion of light. The Death Knight attempted to block the opponent's furious assault with his sword. Another explosion occurred, the force of the impact shattering the surrounding ground. A decisive slash from Eidos struck straight down, unstoppable. After the battle, Eidos stood firm, letting out a sigh of relief as the combat energy around him dissipated. Amidst the desolate battlefield, the Death Knight stood tall, a dark phantom among the flickering will-o'-wisps. wisps. The Death Knight's helmet cracked open after Eidos' attack. Fragments from the helmet scattered to the ground. The Death Knight staggered, having to use his greatsword to prop himself up to avoid falling, his helmet completely shattered. The pain made the Death Knight let out a choked roar. She raised her hand to her face, revealing a pair of astonished and pained green eyes. The Death Knight's face, that of a pink-haired woman, appeared with an expression of extreme shock. Amidst the city's ruins, the Death Knight stood defeated and resentful. The tattered flag of the Empire fluttered in the evening wind, a symbol of collapse. Dorgo, the mastermind, gnashed his teeth with delight, savoring his victory. His silhouette stood tall over a pile of corpses, looking down at the conquered stronghold. Before Dorgo, a red-haired man was forced to his knees, guarded by two skeletal soldiers. Dorgo revealed himself, an arch-lich with glowing red eyes, laughing savagely. Howard Otto Light screamed in utter despair and fury at the one who had massacred his people. Dorgo merely mocked the king's curses, showing amusement. He interrupted condescendingly, signaling that the king's display of rage was over and his coronation ceremony was about to begin. Dorgo arrogantly raised two fingers, a self-satisfied gesture proclaiming his feat of unifying the continent. Howard Otto Light coughed up blood, helpless before the victor's arrogance. The Emperor's bare feet were shackled helpless on the cold ground. Dorgo turned his back, facing his loyal subordinates, the Demon Lords and the Death Knight. He extended his hand, ordering his subordinates to bring him the Empire's crown. The royal crown of the Helios Empire sparkled, a symbol of power about to change hands. Amidst the cheers of the demon commanders, including Cuckoo, the Death Knight presented the final spoils of war, the crown of the defeated empire. In an open space, the Death Knight presented the spoils of war to his master Dorgo. Dorgo placed his scepter on the Death Knight's shoulder, posing a rhetorical question about the reward for his loyalty. The Death Knight's lifeless red eyes stared straight ahead, devoid of emotion. He held the crown steady, awaiting his master's command. Dorgo touched his bony finger to his chin, his gaze on the Death Knight like an object, an affirmation of absolute ownership. He swung his hand, sweeping the crown from the Death Knight's grasp as if it were trash. The sparkling crown fell, Dorgo watching it with contempt. At Dorgo's will, the royal crown exploded into countless fragments, a final act of disdain. The demon commanders, including Cuckoo, recoiled in horror at their master's sudden action. Dorgo raised a hand and deadly red energy streams shot from his fingers. A vortex of red energy enveloped Dorgo, manifesting his wrath. Dorgo's energy descended upon the demon commanders, making them scream in agony. The Death Knight collapsed, his body trembling violently under an invisible force. Dorgo looked down, astonished to realize his attack seemed to have been blocked by some force. Shadows obscured the Death Knight's face, but a defiant whisper escaped his lips. The Death Knight's eyes flared with their original green light, a cold spark of defiance replacing the empty obedience. Dorgo was stunned, unable to believe the resistance from one he believed was completely under his control. For a moment, the image of his soul appeared naked and imprisoned within his own body under the watchful eye of a demonic entity. The Death Knight stood upright, facing Dorgo, declaring his free will. Dorgo smirked, showing amusement at the defiance he considered his greatest masterpiece. He gestured to the demon commanders, allowing the Death Knight to unleash his wrath upon them. The demon commanders charged to attack the Death Knight at Dorgo's command. The Death Knight met the assault, his body enveloped in shadows and purple energy. A flicker of light appeared in Dorgo's eyes as he witnessed the power about to be unleashed. The Death Knight unleashed a destructive burst of purple energy, sweeping away everything around him in a single blow. Dorgo was stunned, all his demon commanders defeated with just one strike. He raised both hands, deciding to play his trump card. From the ground, a colossal army of undead rose at Dorgo's summons. Thousands of immortal soldiers enveloped in green energy, ready to obey. The undead army roared as it surged towards the Death Knight, a tide of death. The Death Knight stood alone, small but unfazed by the colossal demonic legion. He smirked a defiant smile in the face of overwhelming numbers. He growled, his eyes blazing with an overwhelming power, forcing the entire demonic legion to halt. Under the influence of a dark energy, the corpses convulsed and screamed in pain. From a ghostly portal, Dorgo emerged, his silhouette exuding an aura of evil authority. Dorgo's bony face contorted in extreme disbelief and horror. Facing him, the Death Knight stood firm, fists clenched as a declaration of an uncontrollable power unleashed. Dorgo raised a bony hand, his demeanor both understanding and full of sarcasm towards the Death Knight's raid. He smugly pointed to the soul orbs, a silent threat that death was not the end for him. In response, the Death Knight raised her greatsword, her eyes containing only a single purpose, forged through years of captivity, to kill him. Without warning, the Death Knight charged with terrifying speed, leaving a blue streak tearing through space towards the stunned Dorgo. Her green eyes glowed with cold determination, revealing a technique created solely for soul destruction. A surge of sword energy in the form of a screaming skull hurtled towards Dorgo, an attack aimed directly at his very essence. The smugness on Dorgo's face shattered, replaced by pure terror as he faced the unimaginable attack. Two figures collided violently in mid-air, creating a fleeting confrontation of light and shadow. Dorgo looked down at his body, confusion evident as he found no wounds. He let out a scornful laugh, believing the Death Knight's technique had completely failed. Immediately, his skeletal body began to crack and crumble into dust. A tiny spark of Dorgo's soul frantically shot towards an energy vortex in the sky, attempting to escape. The Death Knight's greatsword was launched like an arrow, relentlessly pursuing to block his only escape route. Dorgo's soul turned back in horror, seeing destruction imminent. The sword pierced through the soul, causing a purple energy explosion that completely obliterated Dorgo's existence. His empty skull fell onto the barren ground. It rolled a few times before lying still, a lifeless relic of the tyrant. The Death Knight's shadow enveloped the skull, a silent judgment delivered. With a contemptuous stomp, she crushed the skull into fragments, ending all traces of the enemy. Amidst the battlefield's silence, the image of an old king appeared in the sky, his sorrowful gaze fixed upon her. Memories flooded back, taking her to the scene of her king lying on the ground, horrified by the kingdom's collapse. Exhausted, the Death Knight knelt on the desolate battlefield. She let out a long breath, her hair falling to cover her face, the burden of revenge finally lifted. With solemnity, she knelt upright, hands placed on the hilt of the sword planted before her to perform a final ritual. Her gaze fixed on the blade, a resolute decision made to atone for her mistakes in death. Memories of the brutal blades she wielded while controlled flashed. Another image appeared, she was piercing through an innocent man. A tear rolled down, reflecting the image of the family she had harmed, regret finally expressed. A streak of black blood spurted from her neck. In the silence of dusk, her silhouette fell forward, seeking forgiveness in eternity. In the void's darkness, familiar voices called out Damien and Louise. A glow flashed, revealing Louise's silhouette, who gently asked why Damien was sleeping there. Louise's gentle face became clear, and Damien believed this was the last grace he would receive before falling into hell. He was stunned to realize his own youthful appearance, while Louise merely giggled, teasing that he was trying to flatter her. Memories of a peaceful day returned when Louise promised to cover for him, then turned and went into the house. Damien sat under the tree, bewilderedly watching her back in the familiar mansion. His eyes suddenly glowed orange gold as a horrifying memory flooded back. He himself had destroyed this mansion. He looked down at his hands, utterly bewildered, wondering if this was a dream. The memory of the most terrifying moment flooded back, Dorgo in a dark ritual preparing to end him on the altar. Damien woke with a start, sweating profusely, the horror of the memory still evident on his face. To seek the truth, his gaze focused on a small branch lying on the grass. He picked up the branch, determination forming in his eyes. To verify reality, Damien faced a large rock holding the branch like a weapon. He put strength into his heels, gathering momentum for an attack. With sharp eyes, he prepared to swing the branch. He launched an attack with incredible speed and power. The branch shattered upon impact with the rock. Damien was stunned by the result, unable to believe his eyes. He maintained his attacking posture, doubt gradually turning into realization. A wild smile spread across his lips as he realized his extraordinary power. The rock began to crack from the point of impact. Immediately after, the rock exploded into countless fragments, the force of the explosion engulfing Damien. He stood amidst the rubble, panting. His shoulders began to tremble, giggles escaping. He let out a wild laugh, tilting his head back in a mix of exhilaration and agony. The laughter subsided. Damien knelt to the ground, exhausted. His hands trembled as the first raindrops began to fall. The sky poured down rain. He clutched his shirt, his body writhing in intense pain. Tears mixed with rain rolled down his cheeks as the harsh truth dawned. He realized this was not a dream, he had truly returned to the past. Amidst the rain, memories of a scorned past emerged when his father called him the family's disgrace. Someone who appeared to be his brother rushed in, frantically questioning Damien after a brawl. Damien's face was shrouded in darkness, his shoulders trembling with anguish as he remembered his sister. Memories flooded back, taking him to the fateful day on the carriage crossing the stone bridge. Inside the carriage, Louise covered her face in despair, pained by the ruined family honor. Damien's mother clutched his sleeve, tears streaming as she questioned him about the debt that had driven the family to destitution. Damien bowed his head in endurance, shame and guilt etched deeply on his face. Damien's father roared a silent command, anger transforming his face into a mask of fury. Expelled from home, Damien turned and walked away, leaving behind his brother collapsing in despair at his desk. As Damien stepped through the doorway, a voice from behind called his name. Louise stood in the empty room, sunlight from the window casting down onto the floor like a tragic stage. She held out a pouch of money, her eyes pleading, begging him to take it for a new life. Damien's eyes flashed amber, his wounded pride and guilt making him unable to accept his sister's sacrifice. Louise's hand clutched the money pouch, a final attempt to save her brother. Damien sharply pulled his hand back, resolutely refusing her kindness. He turned and rushed out the door, leaving Louise stunned, watching his retreating figure disappear. Damien ran frantically, as if fleeing from his own family and past. He collapsed, letting out a silent scream, tasting the flavor of sin and shame for the first time. The nightmare of the past faded. Damien realized he was kneeling on damp grass. He looked down blankly, doubt evident as he realized he had returned to the past. A fleeting memory of death, the image of Dorgo standing over his lifeless body, returned as a reminder. He looked up at the sky, wondering if this was a divine miracle. In the quiet forest, Damien knelt, trying to comprehend the incredible event that had just occurred. He confusedly spread out his hands, feeling a young and intact body. To verify his power still existed, Damien focused energy on a nearby rock. A colossal war hammer enveloped in destructive energy appeared in his mind. The memory of a terrifying ground-shaking attack flooded back. In his memory, a knight in full armor known as the Castle Wall Destroyer was facing that attack. In his Death Knight form, Damien recalled the moment he unleashed the finishing blow. That destructive skill was acquired by him after defeating a formidable opponent. Back in reality, the rock in front of Damien shattered, confirming his power remained intact. A worried voice interrupted his thoughts as a servant frantically ran towards him from the mansion. The servant bent over, panting, trying to recognize his young master. Damien searched his memory, trying to recall the servant's name, Victor. Victor looked up, questioning why he was still here when Louise had told him to return. Damien turned back with an innocent expression, completely unaware of what was happening. Victor, his servant, was out of breath as he delivered an urgent message with a terrified expression. Damien maintained his confused expression, trying to piece things together. An angry roar echoed from the Haxon family mansion. Memories flooded back, bringing him to the moment he faced his father, who was drawing his sword with the intent to punish. His rage reaching its peak, Paul swung his sword down at Damien's head. The sword plunged into the floor right beside Damien, Paul's eyes glowing a furious red. Marilda and Louise rushed in, clinging tightly to an out-of-control Paul to prevent him from doing worse. Isolated on the opposite side, Damien realized he had truly returned to this fateful moment. His eyes widened in astonishment, the truth of his regression gradually becoming clear. Memories of beloved faces flashed through his mind, Paul, Marilda and Louise. Seeing his family in chaos, Damien trembled with emotion. A tear rolled down Damien's cheek, expressing his regret and suppressed longing. Paul, after being restrained, pushed his wife and daughter away, sternly questioning Damien. Facing his father, Damien stood tall, his expression unusually calm. Paul was stunned by his son's silence, unable to believe what he was seeing. Still skeptical, Paul crossed his arms, awaiting a familiar excuse from Damien. Damien admitted his mistake with a decisive nod without a single word of justification. Paul sneered, uttering a taunt at his son's sudden change. To show his sincerity, Damien placed his hand on his chest and bowed his head in a silent vow. Damien walked away decisively, leaving his family behind. He opened the door, turning his head to look at his father one last time. A confident and mysterious smile appeared on Damien's lips as he stepped out the door. Paul, Marilda and Louise were completely speechless, unable to comprehend his actions. Confusion was evident on their faces, Louise nervously covering her mouth while Paul frowned in thought. The scene shifted to the bustling commercial city of Landwer. Victor pointed towards a building, informing Damien that they had arrived. The young servant expressed concern about dangerous rumors, but Damien remained confident. Damien ignored the warning and walked away, leaving Victor frantically calling after him. He turned back, offering a reassuring smile to quell Victor's fear. Victor could only watch anxiously as Damien advanced alone. Damien walked alone into the empty courtyard, ready to confront the past. A golden cross on the rooftop gleamed under the sun, symbolizing the second chance he was granted. Memories of his family, Paul, Marilda, and Louise, appeared in Damien's mind, strengthening his resolve never to hurt them again. With unwavering determination, Damien strode towards a building where past mistakes awaited. Two burly thugs, one with a red bandana and one with long hair, noticed his arrival. They blocked Damien's path, the thug with the red bandana brandishing a dagger, issuing an implicit warning. Damien looked at them, a vague sense of familiarity rising from a distant past. Ignoring the threat, Damien calmly expressed his intention to speak with their master to offer an apology. The two thugs were stunned by the unexpected offer. The long-haired thug burst into mocking laughter while his accomplice, thug red bandana, maintained a skeptical expression. The long-haired thug stopped laughing, pondering Damien's change in demeanor, which was unlike his thuggish reputation. They then mocked his family, making indecent remarks about Louise. Hearing the insult, Damien's hand clenched, his suppressed rage beginning to surge. Thug red bandana pressed his face close to Damien, extending the blade disgustingly while the long-haired thug chuckled gleefully behind him. Quick as lightning, Damien grabbed thug red bandana's wrist, stopping the knife. He looked up, his eyes icy, holding tightly to the disarmed knife. Disarmed, thug red bandana roared in anger and disbelief. Without hesitation, Damien plunged the knife into thug red bandana's shoulder. The blade sank deep into his shoulder, blood splattering. Thug red bandana collapsed in pain, falling to the ground. Damien stood there, knife in hand, facing thug long hair, who was horrified and drawing a short sword defensively. A cold smile appeared on Damien's lips, the shadow of a demon appearing behind him, signaling the true nature of the Haxan son. From a distance, Victor watched the unfolding scene with a dazed expression. Hiding behind a corner, Victor screamed in absolute horror. His horrified scream echoed throughout the street. Two passers-by heard the commotion, curiously looking towards the brawl while Victor desperately sought help. Damien flicked blood from the short sword, coldly challenging the remaining thug to finish what he had started. Thug long hair roared, flexing his arm to reveal a black snake tattoo declaring the identity of the Black Snake Gang. That name triggered a memory in Damien, he suddenly realized. The image of the Black Snake Gang, a notorious criminal organization, became clear in his mind. He recalled the past when he, in his former weak state, complained about the exorbitant bill at their bar. The memory of a devastating punch to his face flooded back. He remembered being beaten and humiliated by them in front of a crowd, helplessly begging for his life. Back in the present, a sinister and confident smile appeared on Damien's face as he realized that he was the one who deserved an apology. Thug long hair pointed his sword at Damien, ready to fight, unaware of his opponent's deadly transformation. The long-haired thug let out a savage roar as he swung his sword down at Damien. With terrifying calmness, Damien subtly leaned, narrowly dodging the fatal sword strike, causing his opponent to lose balance. The long-haired thug's face contorted in astonishment as he looked down. Instantly, Damien's punch landed squarely on his face, sending him sprawling to the ground. Damien coughed dryly, covering his mouth as dust clung to his face. He clenched his fist, a fierce red glow flashing in his eyes, revealing his suppressed rage. Pinning the long-haired thug to the ground, Damien raised his dagger, his cold, unwavering eyes signaling a finishing blow. A spray of blood erupted as the blade was swung down mercilessly. Damien stood up, leaving the two original thugs writhing in pain on the ground. He glanced at them with a calm expression, seemingly not considering them a threat. Suddenly, another group of thugs appeared, blocking Damien's path. Their brown-haired leader looked at Damien with scrutinizing eyes, suspicious of his identity. Damien faced them calmly, explaining that he was here to demand an apology. The leader sneered, threatening to use force to make Damien reveal his identity. The subordinate with the snake tattoo ordered an attack with a decisive gesture. Three thugs obeyed, simultaneously rushing towards Damien with weapons in hand. Damien merely snorted in disdain at the attack. A surge of dark energy erupted from Damien, sweeping across the battlefield at terrifying speed. Invisible slashes tore through the enemy ranks, striking them down instantly. Damien slid across the ground, stopping after the lightning-fast attack. The brown-haired leader stood frozen, his face pale with horror at Damien's power. Around him, subordinates lay scattered, screaming from their fatal wounds. Damien gasped for breath, his hand still clutching the dagger, his body clearly tired after using his power. The leader hastily raised both hands, stammering for mercy as he realized the absolute disparity in power. Ignoring the surrender, Damien lunged forward with eerily glowing eyes, his rage allowing no forgiveness. A brutal punch landed directly on the leader's face. The dry sound of breaking bones echoed along with spurting fresh blood. Inside a nearby tavern, life continued normally with a busy waitress and chatting customers. The regular customers happily raised their glasses, completely unaware of the massacre that had just occurred outside. The leader's eyes rolled back, life fading from his face. Damien's dagger was plunged deep into the leader's throat, a cruel end. Damien looked down at the defeated foe with contempt, implicitly blaming him for not knowing his place when he was still being kind. Damien's shadow stretched into the tavern, where customers and the waitress simultaneously turned to look in silence, the leader's body lying right at the threshold. Damien wiped the bloodstain from his cheek with the back of the hand holding the dagger, his eyes cold and emotionless. In a panic, the remaining customers in the tavern hastily fled in disarray, leaving behind a chaotic scene. Amidst the pervasive silence, Damien calmly stepped deeper into the deserted tavern, his dagger still clutched tightly in his hand. From the upstairs balcony, an elderly man appeared, irritably asking about the cause of the commotion. The man, identified as the owner of Anderson Home, gripped his cane, looking down with a scowling face. Damien looked up calmly, admitting that he had dealt with the guards outside. Anderson was startled by Damien's confession, unable to believe that his Black Snake subordinates had been defeated. To assert his status, Damien boldly declared his name as Damien Haxon, stunning Anderson upon hearing the surname of a Viscount family. He affirmed that he was not here to cause trouble but to demand an apology from Anderson himself. Anderson looked puzzled, asking Damien to explain the reason for such an unreasonable demand. Damien's explanation brought back a painful memory, the image of him walking alone on the street, shunned by villagers and regarded as a drunken troublemaker. That humiliation had caused great losses for his family, a fleeting image of his disappointed father and armor left in the shadows. Anderson sneered, appearing condescending and mocking the loss Damien referred to. With a contemptuous smile, Anderson uttered an insult, suggesting that the Haxon family had no honor left to lose. Damien's face darkened, his silence signaling an impending outburst of rage. Anderson continued to provoke, pointing his cane directly at Damien and demanding he pay for the damages caused. A terrifying and malicious smile spread across Damien's lips, his patience having run out. He gritted his teeth, deciding that if there was no apology, he would resort to violence. In retaliation for the insult, Damien unleashed his power, stomping hard on the floor and launching himself straight onto the second-floor railing. He raised his dagger high, lunging towards Anderson with the intent of making the old man pay for his words. Killing intent converged in Damien's eyes, an eerie purple glow flashing, signaling a deadly attack. Suddenly, a cloaked figure darted out at terrifying speed, blocking between Damien and Anderson. Damien froze for a moment, surprised by the sudden intervention. An explosion of blue energy erupted as the mysterious figure blocked Damien's attack. Damien recognized this familiar energy with a look of astonishment. Pushed back by the force, Damien landed lightly, his eyes still fixed on the newcomer. Anderson sighed in relief, calling his protector Sir Ted. Damien stood upright, clutching his dagger, carefully assessing his new opponent. The two stood facing each other, a tense silence enveloping the tavern. Damien looked directly at the cloaked figure, posing a silent question about the identity of a knight in a place like this. The figure Ted revealed his face, with platinum blonde hair and fiery red eyes, his gaze stern. A knight in splendid white and gold armor stood solemnly, a symbol of the martial path they pursued throughout their lives. Ted's fiery red eyes looked directly at Damien, an unavoidable confrontation about to begin. A pyramid diagram appeared explaining the knight ranking system: trainee, apprentice, knight, and official knight. A sword blade glowed with a deadly red aura, illustrating the power of an official knight who could freely use their aura. Heroic combat images showed official knights as transcendent beings capable of cleaving mountains and piercing city walls. Anderson burst into arrogant and contemptuous laughter at Damien's words. Anderson puffed out his chest, gesturing towards Ted with a self-satisfied boast, asserting that Ted was a formidable apprentice knight. From the lower floor, Damien quietly looked up, calmly assessing the situation. With a confident smile, Damien indicated that he had sensed a faint aura from his opponent. Ted's eyes blazed with astonishment, unable to believe that Damien could sense his aura when it had not yet materialized. Damien brought a hand to his chin, his expression thoughtful as he analyzed why someone like Ted would work here. On the balcony, Anderson whispered into Ted's ear, urging him to deal with Damien. Infuriated by Damien's words about his apprentice knight status being a failure, Ted gritted his teeth, suppressing his rage. Anderson's cane was slammed hard onto the floor, shattering into pieces like a signal for the attack. With a silent vow to tear his opponent apart, Ted lunged down from the balcony, his sword in hand, ready to strike. Ted's sword tip stopped right in front of Damien, but Damien remained standing firm, his eyes showing no fear. Damien used his small dagger to block Ted's powerful sword strike, a column of blue energy erupting at the point of impact. After landing, Ted looked at Damien with disbelief, astonished that his attack had been blocked. With incredible speed, Damien moved like a blur, skillfully dodging Ted's attacks. Ted's face was shrouded in the darkness of his hood, revealing only his blazing blue eyes filled with hostility as he began to get serious. Ted unleashed a powerful horizontal slash, the blue energy trail, forcing Damien to retreat and lose his balance. Damien gasped for breath, kneeling on one knee, his body nearing its limit. Ted roared a silent challenge, his bloodshot eyes filled with rage as he prepared to unleash his ultimate attack. A fierce blue aura enveloped Ted as he raised his sword, channeling power for a secret technique. Damien looked up, recognizing the deadly threat from the skill Ted was about to use. From Damien's perspective, Ted's attack was like a giant scythe of energy descending with no escape. Facing the finishing blow, Damien stood firm, deciding to use a technique of his own in response. An image of Phantom Assassin, a legendary killer with glowing red eyes standing in the middle of a battlefield, flashed through Damien's mind. The memory continued with Phantom Assassin turning to face a giant armored figure. In the past, Phantom Assassin stood on the corpses of enemies, pointing his sword at a black and red armored warrior and issuing a silent command. The armored warrior stood motionless, disobeying, while a leaf gently fell. The image of Phantom Assassin's divided face appeared, one side calm, the other burning with murderous intent, showing his determination to eliminate the disobedient one. Back in the present, Damien's eyes glowed purple and a powerful crest reflected in his pupils as he activated his technique. The world in Damien's eyes transformed. He saw through Ted's body, perceiving the energy flow and internal structure like a blueprint. Damien's blade, guided by his transcendent vision, struck a fatal weak point, causing blood to splatter. Memories flooded back. Phantom Assassin unleashed a powerful slash, using the ultimate skill Blade of Death to tear apart a towering demon. The demon's body shattered on the ground, and Phantom Assassin stood there, his eyes radiating contempt for the one who had not known his place. His red eyes gleamed with deadly coldness. Suddenly the demon's fragments twitched and then merged into a hideous mass of flesh, engulfing Phantom Assassin. The demon regenerated, its body still trembling after the fatal attack. Its eyes flashed with horror as it recognized the nature of its opponent. Phantom Assassin unleashed a terrifying surge of killing intent, rendering the demon speechless in extreme fear. In a panic, the demon threw a desperate punch towards Phantom Assassin. Before being destroyed, the demon only managed to see a mad smile on Phantom Assassin's face as he used its own ultimate skill. The memory faded, returning Damien Haxon to reality. Ted lay sprawled on the stone floor, utterly defeated. From above, Damien looked down at the defeated foe at his feet. Ted's helpless image reflected in Damien's eyes a truth confirmed: his enemies never understood what had finished them. He tightened his grip on the blood-stained dagger, fully aware of his new ability, absorbing the skills of defeated enemies. On the balcony, Anderson Home witnessed everything, his face pale with horror. He recoiled, clutching the railing, fear evident in every feature. Cold sweat poured down Anderson's forehead, his entire body trembling uncontrollably. To save his life, Anderson Home threw away his cane and humiliatingly prostrated himself before Damien. Anderson pointed towards a wide-open treasure chest, an offer of material compensation. Damien nodded slightly in acceptance, and a sigh of relief escaped Anderson. Damien glanced towards a dark doorway, calling out to his people. A young boy, Victor, startled, poked his head out, his eyes full of timidity. Obediently, Victor hastily gathered the jewels into a large bag, his eyes gleaming with astonishment at the wealth. While working, the image of Damien's skillful fighting flashed through Victor's mind, a skill he had never seen in his master. Outside the tavern, Anderson and two henchmen bowed deeply as Damien and Victor departed. When their figures had faded, Anderson stood upright, his fear gone. The humility was replaced by a resentful gaze, harboring the intention of revenge by contacting the Black Snake Gang. Suddenly, a white blur flashed past Anderson's face. In a flash, Damien was right behind him, his dagger swinging up, using Blade of Death to execute a brutal punishment. Damien's eyes were icy cold, a silent warning sent to Black Snake: never touch his family. Anderson clutched his bleeding ear, screaming in extreme pain. He collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain and humiliation. Having delivered the warning, Damien and Victor calmly walked towards the sunset. His shadow stretched long on the ground, covering the images of past sins, but his gaze was directed forward, determined with this new light. Determined not to disappoint his family again, Damien Haxon confidently ordered Victor to return home with him. Lionbloom March Manor appeared majestic under the sunset. Memories flooded back, the image of his mysterious older brother whispering a sinister philosophy into Damien's ear. In the memory, the older brother looked at his reflection in the mirror while Damien lay on the bed listening. A smug, knowing smile spread across the older brother's lips. He turned around, his eyes holding a strange purpose, declaring that he would go in search of love. Back in the present, Haxon Manor appeared peaceful under the daytime sun. Damien walked along the corridor yawning comfortably, followed by Victor, who was dragging his feet tiredly. Victor recounted his worries from the previous night, looking exhausted while Damien remained calm. Damien explained smugly that even if they went astray they still received a worthy reward. The shadows of defeated enemies appeared as confirmation that rumors of the Haxon family's power would soon spread. Damien explained to Victor that his actions would change the public's perception of a useless child. Victor expressed concern about Damien's aggression towards the Black Snake Gang. Damien dismissed Victor's worries, asserting that he would handle everything himself if they dared to come. Victor, though still doubtful, accepted and asked Damien where he had learned such extraordinary swordsmanship. Damien awkwardly evaded the question, making Victor even more suspicious. Suddenly an angry shout calling Damien echoed through the corridor. Damien's father, Paul Haxon, rushed forward at terrifying speed, followed by his mother, Marilda Haxon. Rage distorted Paul's face as he charged, his eyes glowing terrifyingly. Paul grabbed Damien's collar, roaring questions about where he had been all day yesterday. Damien calmly faced his father, reassuring him and signaling Victor to act. As ordered, Victor opened the bag and poured out a treasure of glittering gold coins. Paul and Marilda were stunned, their eyes wide with astonishment at the enormous sum of money. Damien fabricated a story that the tavern owner had compensated them, making his mother joyfully embrace the pile of gold. Paul, still skeptical, sat down on the floor amidst the riches and questioned Damien. To add weight to the lie, Damien shifted the responsibility of confirmation to Victor. Damien subtly winked at Victor, a silent command for him to cooperate. Put on the spot, Victor stammered out confirmation of Damien's story under the gaze of Paul and Marilda. Convinced, Paul and Marilda now smiled proudly while Victor looked at Damien with a complex gaze. Damien smiled contentedly. His plan had been a complete success. Bright sunlight pierced through the tree canopy, signaling a new day. Afterwards, Damien ran alone along a cliff, pushing his physical limits. He stopped by a tree trunk, panting but his eyes still full of determination. Sweat streamed down his temples. Damien gasped for breath, exhausted after a light workout. He decided to reach into his shirt. His eyes lit up as he pulled out a purple crystal potion, an unexpected salvation. The small vial was filled with sparkling purple liquid, promising a hidden power. A fleeting memory of an old alchemist explaining a rare power-up potion. Damien squinted, fully aware of the value of the item he held. The image of a mysterious alchemist in a hooded cloak appeared, surrounded by magical green smoke. A smug and calculating smile spread across Damien's lips. Standing in the middle of an empty field, he unhesitatingly brought the potion to his mouth. After drinking it all, he let out a sigh of relief, the vial now empty. Powerful purple energy erupted, bolts of power coursing through Damien's body. With a satisfied smile, he clenched his hand, crushing the empty vial into fragments to demonstrate his new power. Images of his past life resurfaced, a mighty death knight standing atop a mountain ready for battle. Memories of his archenemy Arch-Lich Dorgo appeared gruesomely. Dorgo, commander of the undead army, emerged as an unavoidable future threat. Damien gritted his teeth, iron determination etched on his face as he confronted that prospect. His gaze became resolute, focused on a single objective. From above, Damien looked down at the Haxon mansion, his ultimate protection target. He nodded slightly, reinforcing his resolve with a decisive action. With a push of his heel, he shot off like an arrow, disappearing into the forest. Meanwhile, night fell upon a city, focusing on a tall, ominous tower. Under the moonlight, the lair of the Black Snake Gang appeared, with the symbol of a giant black snake coiled around it. Inside, Cedric Walker, the gang's leader, casually picked his teeth with disdain. His subordinates looked down at Ted, the mercenary they had hired, now lying motionless on the stone floor. With a smug expression, Cedric delivered a cold verdict, eliminating the one he deemed useless. A subordinate showed surprise at the order, but Cedric simply turned his back decisively. The leader walked away, conveying the attitude that anyone could be replaced with money. Suddenly, Cedric and his cronies froze, turning their heads in astonishment towards the entrance. Ted, who seemed to have collapsed, was now staggering to his feet, his eyes burning with hatred. Cedric scoffed, making a false offer to rehire Ted if he endured treatment. Driven mad by betrayal, Ted gripped his sword hilt, his fingers trembling with rage. Consumed by fury, Ted let out a silent roar and charged, his sword aimed directly at Cedric. Just as the blade was close, a black-haired figure lunged from the side, blocking the fatal attack. Ted's face contorted in extreme horror as he was enveloped by dark energy. From Ted's perspective, a towering hooded figure advanced from the city gate. To demonstrate power, the hooded figure used dark magic to control Ted in front of Cedric Walker and his subordinates. He muttered an ancient incantation, green magical characters glowing before him. Ted's eyes widened in horror as the dark energy tightened its grip on him, offering no escape. Shadow creatures with jagged teeth emerged from the magic, lunging to tear Ted apart. A colossal mouth of shadow opened, swallowing Ted in his despair. Hidden beneath the hood, the attacker wore a wicked smile as he witnessed the victim's agony. Sharp shadow teeth brutally bit into the target. Dark energy mercilessly tore Ted's body apart. Ted's headless body fell with a thud onto the cold stone floor. Cedric Walker grimaced in disgust at the bloody scene while his subordinates stood frozen. Cedric expressed dissatisfaction with the messy method of disposal, complaining to the assassin. He pointed, assigning the hooded figure a new contract targeting a nobleman. A sinister and wicked smile appeared on Cedric's face as he ordered the target to suffer as much pain as possible. Cedric handed the assassin a bag of advance payment. The assassin took the bag of money, his face with a stitched scar and purple eyes flashing with greed and confidence. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Damien Haxon panted after a rigorous training session. He strained to perform a heavy physical exercise, dust kicking up around him. His feet slid on the ground from using too much force. Damien looked at his fist with satisfaction, feeling his physical strength noticeably increasing. He gazed thoughtfully at the training equipment, pondering something unusual. Standing alone in the courtyard, Damien felt it was strange that the Black Snake Gang had made no moves yet. Suddenly Damien spun around when he heard a rustling sound from the bushes. Thinking the enemy had arrived, he clenched his fists ready to fight. Damien lunged, throwing a punch directly at the figure who had just emerged from the shadow. His eyes widened in astonishment as he recognized the person he had just attacked. Grabbed by the neck, the young man with glasses looked at him in panic, his identity revealed as Abel. Damien, stunned, released his grip, causing Abel to fall to the ground. Abel Haxon, Damien's younger brother, sat on the ground, rubbing his neck, looking at his brother with reproach and pain. A horrifying vision flashed through Damien's mind, the image of Abel's headless body lying on the ground. Damien was speechless, unable to utter a word about his mistake. With a remorseful expression, Damien extended his hand to help Abel up, an unspoken apology. Abel Haxon raised his hand to stop him, his face stern as he confronted his brother. Turning away, Abel coldly brushed aside Damien's unspoken apology. He pushed up his glasses, beginning to question the rumors of a bar brawl their father had heard. Abel's eyes narrowed suspiciously, accusing Damien of lying to the family. Damien merely smiled calmly, admitting that he was responsible for everything. Angrily, Abel lunged and grabbed Damien's collar, unable to believe his weak brother could cause such trouble. Abel pointed directly at Damien's face, his tone sharp as he warned his brother not to disgrace the family. Damien gently placed his hand on Abel's head, his gaze strangely calm. Abel tried to push Damien's hand away but failed, astonished to realize his brother's extraordinary strength. Damien smiled reassuringly, promising that nothing bad would happen again. Just then a servant rushed towards them, his face full of panic. The brothers' conversation was interrupted by urgent news. They hurried down the corridor, heading towards the main living room. Damien pushed the door open and entered, followed by Abel with a still bewildered expression. Inside the room, Paul and Marilda Haxon were sitting opposite an uninvited guest, Erwin Lionbloom. Erwin took a sip of tea, his eyes sweeping over Damien with a look of self-satisfaction. He waved a feigned greeting, beginning to recount the story of the incident at the banquet hall years ago. Damien's eyes turned cold, the name Erwin Lionbloom stirring up a bitter memory. Erwin smirked, provoking Damien with a meaningful glance. Memories flooded back, taking Damien back under the splendid chandeliers of that year's party. Amidst the murmurs of the crowd, Damien confronted Erwin, trying to remain calm. Provoked by words insulting his honor and his sisters, Damien lost control. Erwin leaned close to Damien's ear, uttering a final insult. With a malicious smile, Erwin admitted his actions, igniting Damien's fury. Anger flared, Damien's eyes blazing as he realized he had fallen into his opponent's provocation trap. In a moment of madness, Damien delivered a devastating punch to Erwin's face. Erwin fell backward, collapsing onto the floor to everyone's astonishment. He lay there, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, a victorious smile still on his lip. Back in the present, Damien clenched his fist, realizing that Erwin's easy defeat back then was part of a plan. Erwin, with a sinister smile, revealed that he had always admired Louise. Damien's and Abel's eyes froze, sensing something ominous. Erwin leaned back, making a brazen demand for a marriage between him and Louise. Paul, Marilda, Damien, and Abel were all stunned, horrified by Erwin's impudence. Memories of past humiliation flared in Damien Haxon's blazing eyes. Paul Osborne Haxon listened to the brazen proposal of Erwin Lionbloom, who was seeking to resolve the issue through family power. Erwin's eyes gleamed with cold self-satisfaction, his two distinctive moles under his left eye further enhancing his sinister appearance. Erwin leaned forward, his tone full of challenge, accusing the Haxon family and threatening them with his family's wrath. He issued a cruel ultimatum: either pay for the humiliation or accept him. Paul gritted his teeth, cold sweat breaking out as he thought of the Lionbloom family's power, but the thought of handing his daughter to this depraved man pained him. Just then the door opened and Damien Abel Haxon and Marilda Haxon entered, interrupting the tense atmosphere. Louise Haxon stepped out from behind them, her eyes resolute as she declared her acceptance of the proposal to protect her family. Paul, Marilda and Abel all turned around simultaneously, their faces contorted with astonishment and strong opposition to Louise's decision. Damien bowed his head, darkness obscuring his face as pain and helplessness surged within him. Louise forced a smile, trying to reassure her family, while the painful memory of her sacrifice resurfaced in Damien's mind. A malicious and triumphant smile spread across Erwin's lips. He stood up leisurely, his hand on the hilt of his sword, praising Louise's wisdom. Erwin walked towards Louise, promising to send a formal request, soon completely ignoring the presence of the others. Damien moved suddenly, blocking Erwin's path, his eyes glowing terrifyingly red. Erwin smirked, leaned close to Damien and uttered a contemptuous provocation about their future relationship. Louise gasped, covering her mouth, whispering her brother's name in despair. Erwin laughed loudly, pretending not to hear Damien's murderous mumble to provoke him further. Fury erupted Damien, delivering a devastating punch directly to Erwin's face. For a moment the image of him collapsing after being provoked, blood splattering, appeared as a warning of past failure. Brushing aside his hesitation, Damien delivered a thunderous kick, sending Erwin flying backward to Louise's astonishment. He raised his fist, his eyes no longer showing blind rage but steely determination. Damien charged forward, ready to end the confrontation on his own terms. Memories flooded back, taking Damien back to an earlier time when a servant rushed in to announce that Louise and Erwin had arrived. The Damien of the past ran down the corridor, his face beaming with joy at the prospect of seeing his beloved sister again. He eagerly opened the door, slightly a radiant smile on his lips. Damien's smile froze, replaced by extreme horror as the scene inside met his eyes. Through the crack in the door he witnessed Erwin grabbing Louise's hair, roaring venomous words at her. Erwin gripped Louise's head tightly, his face contorted with anger as he insulted her and her family. He cruelly pushed Louise, sending her sprawling onto the floor. Erwin stood over her, slowly putting on a black glove while threatening to teach her a lesson, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. Witnessing it all, Damien's fists clenched so tightly that veins bulged, a silent but deadly rage forming. That rage erupted into action, an invisible force from Damien sending Erwin crashing into the wall, initiating his revenge. Damien collapsed outside the door, the burden of guilt weighing heavily on his shoulders as the image of Louise being taken away haunted his mind. Pure fury flared in Damien's eyes, turning them fiery red as the name Erwin Lionbloom echoed in his mind like a curse. To retaliate for his family's humiliation, Damien swung his fist skyward, an unspoken declaration of war. His actions horrified the entire Haxon family, while Erwin Lionbloom, the one who had just been attacked, lay sprawled on the floor. Alerted by the sound, Erwin's two bodyguards, one with red hair and one with black hair, rushed into the room, swords drawn and ready. The red-haired bodyguard rushed forward, saw Erwin on the floor and turned to confront Damien, who stood there defiantly. The bodyguards pointed their swords at Damien, forming a protective barrier for their master. Erwin slowly sat up, a sinister and contemptuous smile spreading across his lips as he looked at Damien. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, the anger from being attacked twice compressed in his hand. Paul and Marilda Haxon watched the scene with horrified expressions, completely helpless. Drawing his sword abruptly, Erwin pointed it at Damien, his eyes flashing a deadly threat. The bodyguards quickly intervened, with Erwin trying to cool their master's hot temper. Erwin gnashed his teeth in anger, dismissing his subordinates' pleas with a silent command. The red-haired bodyguard still tried to persuade him, only to incur his master's own wrath. Erwin delivered a brutal blow, sending the red-haired bodyguard flying into a cabinet, shattering it. Erwin's fist clenched, glowing red with fury as he unleashed his wrath upon his own man. From a corner of the room, Abel and Louise Haxon were stunned by Erwin's unpredictable violent act. Erwin stepped over the injured bodyguard, heading straight for Damien, his eyes focused solely on his single target. Louise, in a panic, realized that Erwin would not let her brother off easily. She rushed out, hands clasped together, pleading desperately to prevent the impending bloodshed. Damien raised his hand, stopping Louise, a decisive yet gentle gesture. He turned to look at his sister, his eyes conveying a silent message that he would handle everything. To protect his sister from meaningless sacrifice, Damien stepped forward, blocking her from Erwin, issuing a silent challenge. Erwin and Damien faced each other, tension filling the room as a proposal for a sword fight was made. Erwin scoffed at the proposal, his eyes glancing towards Louise as if she were a predetermined commodity. To provoke his opponent, Damien taunted, implying that Erwin was afraid of a fair fight. Erwin gnashed his teeth, Damien's provocation having struck his pride. A malicious and sinister smile appeared on Erwin's face as he had found the perfect opportunity for revenge and to humiliate his opponent. Outside the mansion under the twilight, the dueling ground had been prepared. Paul and Marilda looked at their children worriedly, only able to hope for a miracle. Abel, with a pessimistic expression, explained to his father that Erwin was a talented swordsman and Damien stood no chance. Erwin stood on the field carrying his sword on his shoulder with a smug look, completely confident in his victory. He provoked Damien one last time, but Damien just stood calmly, an enigmatic confidence emanating from him. With a confident smile, Damien Haxon raised his fork, his eyes asserting that this was all he needed to defeat his opponent. Erwin Lionbloom, gripping his sword, looked at the fork with absolute skepticism. The Haxon family watched the scene with a mixture of shock and extreme worry, unable to comprehend Damien's actions. On the dueling ground, Erwin burst into arrogant laughter at Damien's clear insult. Erwin's smile turned malicious. He believed Damien had lost his mind from fear. Without a warning, Erwin lunged forward, determined to punish Damien's insolence with a lightning-fast attack. Damien leaned slightly, easily dodging Erwin's first strike by a hair's breadth. The smugness on Erwin's face froze, replaced by astonishment as his attack completely missed its target. Determined not to be humiliated, Erwin tightened his grip on the sword hilt and a stream of fiery red energy began to gather around his weapon. A swirling streak of fiery red light emanated from the sword hilt, signaling a powerful technique about to be unleashed. Erwin roared, unleashing his full power into a technique in the form of a ferocious energy lion that charged directly towards Damien. The powerful attack grazed past Damien, tearing up the ground and leaving a trail of destruction behind him. The ground was torn open, a deep trench forming where the sword energy had just swept through. Amidst the dust and smoke, Damien stood firm without a scratch, calmly exhaling, his hand still holding the fork. Erwin and his two bodyguards were stunned, horrified to see Damien completely unharmed after such a destructive attack. Erwin's astonishment quickly turned into rage as he realized Damien had dodged all of his basic attack. Damien merely smirked, his confidence stemming from having perfectly analyzed the Lionbloom family's swordsmanship. Memories flooded back, the image of a much more formidable swordsman, Michael Lionbloom, appearing in his mind. Back in reality, Erwin's fists trembled with anger at Damien's dismissive attitude. Damien's eyes suddenly narrowed. He sensed a change in his opponent's energy. Erwin's entire body erupted in a fiery red aura. He was channeling his full power. Erwin stomped his foot hard on the ground, which cracked under the pressure of the amplified energy. With fiery eyes, Erwin charged forward once more, this time with amplified speed and power. Damien maintained a calm expression. He knew exactly which technique to use to deal with this situation. Two opposing streams of energy collided, creating a blinding explosion of light right in the middle of the dueling ground. Louise and Abel gasped in astonishment, stunned by the incredible display of power unfolding before their eyes. Erwin's eyes widened in horror as his sword blade was stopped right in front of him. With an unbelievable move, Damien caught Erwin's sword blade with his bare hand, his eyes glowing red. Damien lightly slid the fork along the restrained blade, preparing for his counterattack. He unleashed a secret technique, his body moving at dizzying speed, creating countless blurry afterimages. Cold sweat broke out on Erwin's forehead. He realized he was completely overwhelmed and facing mortal danger. With an icy gaze, Damien lunged forward, the fork in his hand aimed directly at Erwin's weak point. In a final movement, the fork plunged straight into Erwin's throat, ending the match decisively and mercilessly. Louise and Abel were speechless, extreme astonishment clearly visible on their faces. Paul and Marilda Haxon were equally stunned, their mouths agape at the unbelievable sight. Erwin's two bodyguards screamed in panic upon seeing their master in danger. Damien held the eating fork close to Erwin's neck, a cold and humiliating threat. A silent scream escaped Erwin as he collapsed to the ground in horror. With an icy expression, Damien implicitly declared that death was still too light for Erwin's sins, but he would spare him for his family's sake. Damien stood tall, looking down at Erwin cowering on the ground, implicitly asking if the outcome was clear. A look of madness erupted in Erwin's eyes as he realized the harsh truth of his defeat. Damien stood tall against the sunset, his eyes flashing an undeniable silent command: be gone. The Haxon family sat at the dinner table in heavy silence, a tense atmosphere pervading. Damien put down his fork, decisively ending his meal. He stood up from the table, signaling that he would go for his morning training. Paul watched his son's back as he left the dining room. Silence enveloped the dining table once more after Damien left. Marilda looked at her husband, her eyes urging him to ask Damien about what had happened. Abel mumbled in disbelief, unable to believe his weak brother could have changed completely overnight. Paul raised his hand, signaling everyone to be silent, deciding that they would let Damien speak for himself when the time was right. Marilda looked at her husband with a disapproving expression while Paul brought a piece of meat to his mouth, trying to maintain a normal demeanor. Cold sweat broke out on Paul's forehead. His curiosity was overshadowed by a sense of unease. Paul's fear conjured an illusion of Damien with menacing red eyes, making him realize his son was now truly terrifying. In his room, Damien tightly fastened 10 kilograms weights to his legs, preparing for his rigorous training session. Louise rushed over, calling her brother's name with an urgent expression. Damien turned and saw his sister standing there holding a training axe. She sighed in relief upon seeing him still there. Louise hesitated, trying to find the words to talk about yesterday's events. Damien suddenly realized something, a flash of understanding gleaming in his eyes. Without an explanation, Damien bowed formally, expressing his deep apology for acting recklessly and putting his sister in a difficult situation. He continued to bow, promising that he would never let something similar happen again. Louise quickly reached out, gently stopping Damien. She placed her hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of thanks for all words. Louise confessed that although she had said she would follow Erwin, her heart was incredibly afraid and opposed to it. Damien looked at his sister with understanding and a hint of sadness, realizing the burden she had endured. Images of yesterday flashed through Louise's mind, Damien stepping up to protect her, the scene of Erwin's defeat and the moment he shielded her. With a relieved smile, Louise wiped away a tear of happiness, her heart filled with gratitude for the brother who had saved her. Damien Haxon's eyes lit up with a new realization, a moment of understanding flashed. A sincere and relieved smile appeared on Damien's lips as he expressed his gratitude. Damien stood before his sister Louise Haxon. The tension between them had dissipated, replaced by genuine warmth. Louise unexpectedly raised a training axe, catching Damien's attention. As Damien turned to leave, Louise called him back, offering an object towards him. Louise brightly showed off a short sword, explaining that it was a gift from their father for his training. She handed the sword to Damien, conveying their father's silent love. Louise suddenly changed her expression, mimicking their father's stern look, to deliver a playful warning about not using a fork as a weapon anymore. Damien gripped the sword hilt tightly, a gift carrying the weight of approval. With a decisive swing, Damien drew the sword from its sheath, the blade glinting, his eyes reflecting a new determination. At the same time, in the armory, Paul Osborne Haxon suddenly sneezed, feeling an unusual chill. Paul looked around the empty room, puzzled by the mysterious draft that had just passed. Night fell, darkness enveloping the Haxon mansion under the full moon. Outside the gate, 2 Haxon guards stood watch, one yawning tiredly while the other remained alert. A purple shadow entity crept through the lawn undetected by the guards. The mysterious entity's purple eyes gleamed in the darkness, observing its target. Shadowy tendrils reached out, gripping the mansion's iron gate. The gate creaked open eerily under the influence of an unseen force. The shadow entity glided through the gate, entering the inner grounds. Its silhouette appeared before the mansion, a humanoid figure completely shrouded in darkness. Inside, the flame of an oil lamp on the wall flickered slightly as the entity passed. The floor was empty, with only faint light reflecting upwards. The shadow of a hooded figure swiftly glided across the floor. In his bedroom, Abel Haxon slept soundly, his glasses neatly placed on the bedside table. In another room, Paul and Marilda Haxon were also deep in sleep. The shadow of a stranger stopped before Louise's bedroom door. Louise was sleeping peacefully in her bed, unaware of the ominous presence. The shadowy figure of a hooded stranger loomed faintly over sleeping Louise, a hovering threat. The intruder, a man with a scarred face, revealed a morbid smile as he looked at Louise. The scarred assassin's hand reached towards Louise, preparing to carry out his dark intention. Suddenly, the scarred assassin startled and froze, sensing another presence. From the assassin's perspective, Damien stood at the threshold, quietly leaning against the doorframe, his sword resting on his shoulder. Damien's eyes glowed a deadly red, looking directly at the intruder with a silent, menacing question. In Louise Haxon's bedroom, a hooded, scarred assassin approached her in her sleep, unaware that Damien Haxon was quietly observing from afar. Confusion was evident on the intruder's scarred face. He couldn't believe his sleeping charm had failed against someone. Without hesitation, he channeled dark energy into his hand, deciding to eliminate the unexpected threat with a fatal blow. A deadly purple energy stream was shot directly towards Damien. Damien lunged out of the shadows, using the short sword he had just received to block the energy stream in a small explosion. The assassin was stunned, unable to believe his eyes when he saw the attack had been blocked. Standing firm after the attack, Damien pointed his sword at the intruder, his cold gaze questioning his identity. His eyes glowing red, Damien growled a silent demand requiring the stranger to answer for his actions towards his sister. Suddenly noise from outside echoed in, startling the assassin, who realized the situation was becoming complicated. He clicked his tongue in annoyance, understanding that the explosion had woken the household servants. Deciding to retreat, the assassin enveloped his body in a dark mist, putting Damien on alert. To escape, he transformed into a phantom and shot through the window with astonishing speed. Without hesitation, Damien lunged out the window in pursuit. The assassin's shadow quickly vanished into the night, leaving Damien alone in the yard. Damien watched with annoyance, realizing he had let the enemy escape. He suddenly paused, sensing a familiar trace of dark energy lingering in the air. The next morning, a false peace enveloped the Haxon family estate. In the stables, two servants panicked upon discovering the Viscount's prized horse had died mysteriously. They huddled together, fearful and confused about how to explain it to their master. Damien unexpectedly appeared behind them, making the two servants jump in fright. He raised a reassuring hand, signaling that they would not be punished and that he had only come to investigate. Damien requested to be left alone, his gaze serious as he looked towards the horse. He gently placed his hand on the horse's cold body, concentrating on sensing. Familiar dark energy emanated from the animal's corpse, confirming Damien's suspicions about the intruder from last night. In his mind, the image of the enemy's wicked purple eyes appeared vividly. Damien concluded that the intruder was a dangerous dark maid. He glanced towards his parents' bedroom, seeing Paul and Marilda Haxon still fast asleep, completely unaware. A cold resolve formed in Damien's eyes. He would handle this threat himself to protect his family. Damien followed the faint trail of dark energy leading out of the estate and into the forest. The trail led him to a secluded cave where dark energy emanated from within. At the same time, inside the cave, the scarred assassin stood amidst a pile of items, calling out to a mysterious entity named Cuckoo. He picked up a vial, smiling cunningly as he thought about having tricked the Black Snake boss into providing materials. He looked at the pile of valuable items with satisfaction, knowing they would serve his own experiments, not any curse. In his dark lair, the scarred assassin sighed, his face bitter over his fallen circumstances. A flicker of annoyance flashed in his eyes as he thought about having to hide from the church's pursuit. He turned, determined to hide in his messy magical laboratory. Suddenly he stopped, his nose wrinkling slightly at a strange and unpleasant smell. He spun around, stunned, to see Damien Haxon already standing at the entrance of the lair. Damien merely offered a calm smile, his sharp gaze confirming his identity as Viscount Haxon's eldest son. The scarred assassin took a step back, raising a hand in question, but Damien merely pointed coldly to the ground, implying that the assassin's own tracks had led him there. Astonishment was evident on the scarred assassin's face. He re-evaluated the young opponent before him, realizing he was no ordinary reckless individual. Damien gripped his sword hilt, his gaze accusatory, asserting the assassin's connection to Black Snake. The scarred assassin shrugged, acknowledging the assigned task, a wicked sneer appearing on his lip. A fleeting look of disdain crossed Damien's lips. He looked at his enemy like a pathetic dying man. The scarred assassin's smugness vanished, replaced by extreme rage. He let out a silent roar, his hand reaching out as purple dark energy surged, transforming him into a frenzied phantom. Damien tightened his grip on the sword, his gaze resolute, expressing an uncompromising vow. He swung his sword, the gleaming blade reflecting the distorted image of the scarred assassin, Damien's eyes flashing with a deadly glint reserved for dark mages. The scarred assassin was stunned, realizing that his identity as a dark mage had been exposed. Without hesitation, he unleashed a barrage of dark magic orbs, determined to eliminate Damien immediately. Damien lunged forward, moving with extraordinary speed, narrowly dodging the deadly energy streams. Surprised by Damien's speed, the scarred assassin couldn't react in time as his opponent closed in. With a decisive spinning motion, Damien swung a powerful slash aimed at the scarred assassin. The blade cut through the scarred assassin's energy body, leaving a trail of light. The scarred assassin's body was split in half, but then the two halves quickly merged back together in an eerie purple glow. Damien stepped back, his eyes showing clear astonishment as he recognized the familiar regeneration ability the assassin had used to escape before. Fully regenerated, the scarred assassin gave a smug smile, mocking the futility of Damien's attack. He lunged forward, his form blurred like a ghost, a silent challenge issued. Damien's eyes glowed red, his resolve turning into cold fury, determined to finish off his enemy at all costs. He swung his sword, creating countless sword illusions that rushed towards the scarred assassin in a devastating attack. The scarred assassin struggled to defend, momentarily surprised by Damien's power. Damien held his sword steady, his gaze as cold as ice, silently pronouncing a death sentence on the one who dared to step in here. Pushed back, the scarred assassin roared madly as dark tentacles stretched out from beneath Damien's feet. He waved his hand, summoning cuckoo shadow demons from all over the lair, ready for an all-out assault. Damien recognized the deadly threat surrounding him, his face tense at the enemy's magical formation. A colossal shadow demon rose, baring its fangs, ready to devour Damien in an overwhelming attack. The purple dark magic cuckoo shadow tentacles were retracting. Dark energy gathered, transformed, and dissipated. The scarred assassin sneered maliciously, his eyes asserting that the enemy's life was in his hands. His face contorted into a greedy and wicked expression, showing satisfaction with the destructive power he wielded. He smugly turned his back, believing no one could stand in his way anymore. Suddenly a sound made the scarred assassin turn back in surprise, his smug expression replaced by extreme astonishment. Damien Haxon stood firm, the dark tentacles shattering upon contact with him, completely ineffective. The scarred assassin took a step back, panic evident on his face as he roared a silent question. Damien's gaze remained calm, but with a hint of surprise at his enemy's confusion and his own. He stared in astonishment at the glowing purple magical mark on the back of his hand, and then memories flooded back. The memory replayed the image of a cloaked skeletal entity, Dorgo, standing tall with overwhelming power. Dorgo looked down at an ancient ceramic vase where dark energy was swirling. Dorgo's shadow enveloped a muscular warrior kneeling, the one chosen to become his death knight. Dorgo declared, granting this warrior the strongest body and magic, but was still not satisfied. He offered a sword, determined to transform this warrior into the ultimate living weapon. To complete his creation, Dorgo concentrated dark power into his hand. The skeletal entity's face showed intense concentration. Dark energy violently erupted from Dorgo's hand. He watched his creation absorbing the power, an expression of astonishment appearing on his bony face. Dorgo clasped his hands together, focusing all energy into one point. A colossal vortex of purple energy engulfed the warrior's body. Even Dorgo had to brace himself against the terrifying power he had just unleashed. Dorgo's hand pressed onto the warrior's head, directly channeling the energy into his body. The warrior screamed in extreme pain as his body was torn apart and reformed by the power. His body was engulfed in a blinding explosion of purple light. As the light subsided, Dorgo looked at his creation with satisfaction. The eyes of the newly created Death Knight glowed with dark power. Now the warrior stood up, his body completely transformed, long hair flowing and a magical mark hovering above his head. Back in reality, Damien stared at the mark on his hand, now fully understanding its nature. A colossal purple energy orb formed in front of Damien. To neutralize the threat, Damien lunged forward and delivered a precise kick to the center of the energy orb. The scarred assassin watched in horror as Damien landed steadily after shattering his magic. Damien maintained a calm expression, his eyes reflecting the confidence of someone holding a deadly secret. Damien Haxon recalled the enemy's words, the image of a gruesome monster appearing in his mind. Memories of the Yulan organization's brutality flashed through his mind, dark mages draining the life from their victims. Damien's eyes sharpened, he now clearly understood the enemy's nature. The scarred assassin felt uneasy, deciding to end the battle immediately. He issued a silent challenge, declaring he would use his trump card against Damien. The ancient bracelet on the scarred assassin's wrist began to glow brightly. The scarred assassin's figure became colossal as he unleashed a pillar of dark energy skyward. Dark energy enveloped his arm, deforming it grotesquely. His face became cruel as dark power surged. Damien noticed the immense amount of mana being released, a hint of surprise in his eyes. The ancient bracelet glowed intensely, it was the source of energy for the spell. Before Damien, dark energy coalesced into a colossal, hideous hellfire monster. With a silent roar, the scarred assassin waved his hand in command, dark magical marks appearing on his face and hand. The energy monster's jaws lunged down, threatening to swallow Damien. An explosion of dark energy engulfed Damien's position. The hellfire orb enveloped the target. The scarred assassin laughed smugly, believing he had incinerated his enemy forever. Amidst the flames, Damien stood firm, his calm gaze denying his opponent's victory. The smugness on the scarred assassin's face vanished, replaced by doubt and growing panic. Damien stood tall, unharmed, as the hellfire was absorbed into his body. The dark energy was drawn into a vortex around Damien, completely neutralized by him. Damien's eyes flashed with purple light, and he smiled confidently as he fully absorbed the enemy's power. The scarred assassin stammered in horror, unable to believe the terrifying power he was witnessing. Damien raised his sword, challenging the enemy with a contemptuous gesture. He gritted his teeth, rage flaring as he had to use the power he hated most. The silhouette of an original Death Knight appeared behind Damien, a reminder of the source of the power he was forced to use. The scarred assassin recoiled in fear, realizing the energy aura surrounding Damien's sword was the legendary Aura Blade technique. Damien gripped the sword hilt tightly, channeling all the absorbed energy into the blade. He swung his sword, unleashing a destructive slash. The scarred assassin's face froze in extreme horror. The blue light slash swept through, giving the enemy no chance to escape. The scarred assassin's body was torn apart by the slash. Damien stood there, his sword still imbued with an energy aura, as the remnants of his enemy vanished into thin air. The scarred assassin collapsed, coughing blood amidst the rubble. Damien Haxon's sword tip pressed against his throat, a final offer made in silence. Damien's silhouette loomed over the defeated foe, his eyes glowing with powerful purple light as he forced an answer. A carriage entered the commercial city of Landwork under a clear blue sky. Inside the carriage, Victor anxiously questioned Damien, who was calmly reading a book. Damien smiled condescendingly, gesturing for Victor to be silent and follow. Damien's finger glided over the cover of the book, featuring a gruesome skull, a dark aura emanating from it. He explained the origin of the dark magic book, a trophy from defeating a sorcerer. Victor crossed his arms, looking skeptical and disbelieving his master's jest. Suddenly Victor sniffed, noticing a strange scent lingering in the air. The boy looked up, his gaze directed towards Damien and the source of the foul smell. The carriage stopped outside a building. Upon arrival, Damien stood looking out at the bustling street, holding a stained cloth bag. He handed the bag to Victor and gave him a task. Damien coldly revealed the horrific contents inside the bag. Victor froze, the truth evident in his eyes. The boy tremblingly opened the bag, and the reflection in his horrified eyes confirmed Damien's words. Utter horror made Victor scream and throw the bag away. Damien quickly caught the bag, raising a finger to signal Victor to remain calm amidst the curious crowd. He whispered into the gasping servant's ear, giving him an important task before explaining everything. Damien gave Victor both the magic book and the bag containing the head, emphasizing that he must deliver them to a specific location. Victor's face turned pale with fear at the prospect of impending trouble. A towering stone tower rose into the sky, a giant snake symbol wrapped around it like a threat. Damien headed straight for the entrance, where two burly guards stood blocking the way. He stopped in front of them, his sharp gaze sweeping over the two thugs of the Black Snake Gang. With absolute confidence, Damien Haxon boldly declared his identity. The two guards looked at each other, mocking the name Haxon. The one-eyed guard squinted, his remaining eye a flicker of recognition flashing as he remembered his boss's warning. Damien crossed his arms, confirming that they knew who he was and demanding them to step aside. The bald guard signaled his accomplice, pretending to agree to make Damien drop his guard. Suddenly he pulled out a gun, the hammer cocked and ready to fire. Instead of aiming at Damien, the guard raised his gun straight into the air and fired a bright red flare. Damien looked up at the alarming light, his face hardening as he realized the confrontation had become more complicated. The Black Snake Gang subordinate with the eye patch smirked insolently, uttering a taunt. From the rooftop, mysterious cloaked figures silently watched Damien Haxon jump into the alley. Damien's eyes gleamed with deadly confidence, ready for the confrontation. The bald subordinate signaled, and a crowd of Black Snake members immediately surrounded Damien, ready to attack on command. A challenging smirk appeared on Damien's lips. Damien turned, his hand clutching a red bag, his eyes promising a brutal punishment. A man was gagged with a golden cup, symbolizing forced silence. Meanwhile, at a lavish party, Landwork Governor Sebastian Baker was happily enjoying the service of two women. Sitting at the same table, Robert, a knight of Landwork, was tipsy. The host of the party, the boss of Black Snake, Cedric Walker, looked at his guests with self-satisfaction. Cedric leaned towards a merchant, offering the Black Snake Gang control over all business operations in the city. Cedric's hand gripped the cup tightly, asserting the gang's absolute control over the red light district. Sebastian Baker raised his cup, his face clearly showing self-satisfaction as he boasted that he could easily suppress any resistance with his power. Cedric turned to flatter Robert, praising the knight's role in protecting the city. Cedric's smile was cunning and obsequious. Robert, flattered, smiled awkwardly and smugly. The whole group raised their cups in a falsely cheerful atmosphere while Cedric and Robert hailed the governor. But behind that facade, Cedric's eyes turned cold as he secretly disdained those he had to bow to. A giant black snake appeared in his mind, its mouth open to swallow the entire city. Cedric's face contorted with wicked ambition, imagining the day everyone would kneel before him. Suddenly, a Black Snake subordinate burst into the banquet hall in a panic. Cedric turned, showing annoyance at being disturbed while entertaining guests. He stood up and walked outside with the subordinate to hear the report. The subordinate leaned close to Cedric's ear, whispering urgent news. From inside the room, Robert froze upon hearing the name Damien Haxon, the cup in his hand pausing. Memories of a deal with a dark sorcerer flooded Cedric's mind as he recalled having given instructions to his subordinates beforehand. Confident in his preparations, Cedric waved the subordinate away, completely disregarding the threat. Back in the alley, Damien alone faced the bald subordinate, the one-eyed man, and another holding a sword. Damien stood still, easily neutralizing an attack with a surge of purple energy enveloping his opponent's sword. Dark energy violently erupted from Damien, his eyes and hair glowing with an eerie purple hue. An invisible shockwave swept through, sending all the Black Snake subordinates flying into the air. On a nearby street, a woman turned back in astonishment as she sensed the chaos. Amidst the chaos, three mysterious cloaked figures slowly advanced, their objective still unknown. A figure fully shrouded in a cloak appeared, eyes glowing with mysterious energy, offering a confident reassurance. Cedric Walker's face changed, horror evident in his wide staring eyes. Standing on the balcony of a tall tower, Cedric looked down with a bad premonition. From above, Cedric and his subordinates watched in horror the scene below, where Damien Haxon stood alone among his defeated enemies. Below, Damien stood defiantly on a fallen thug, his sword still raised with a smug smile. Cedric turned to his subordinate, his face incredulous as he pressed for the intruder's identity. He turned away, clenching his fists in anger as he realized the rumors about Damien were just a trick. Cold sweat broke out on Cedric's forehead as he suddenly realized that even the dark sorcerer he had sent might have been eliminated. In extreme panic, Cedric turned and fled, deciding he had to seek help. Suddenly, a glowing red magic staff pointed directly at Damien, signaling a new attack. On a nearby rooftop, three mages from the Mage trio group prepared to attack their leader, challenging Damien with a contemptuous gaze. A blazing fireball formed from pure magical energy. The mage leader, Spiky Hair, threw the fireball towards Damien with a roar. To directly confront the flames, Damien stood firm and swung his sword. Mage leader Spiky Hair scoffed arrogantly, believing nothing could stop his magic. Contrary to expectations, Damien's blade easily tore through the incoming flame. Damien retaliated with a masterful sword technique, unleashing a sharp burst of energy that ripped through the air. The smug look on Mage leader Spiky Hair's face turned into utter astonishment as Damien's attack surged forward. A violent explosion engulfed the rooftop, completely annihilating the group of mages. Damien stood amidst the post-battle silence, looking towards the ruined rooftop where only a broken staff remained. After resolving the threat, he turned, preparing to track down the true mastermind. Suddenly, Damien startled and turned back, sensing a powerful energy approaching. Unexpectedly, night blue aura descended from above the impact, shaking the ground and radiating an overwhelming blue aura. Damien took a defensive stance, observing his formidable new opponent as he slowly rose from the dust. He clearly felt the opponent's dense aura, making his skin tingle. From behind Damien, night blue aura's imposing figure emerged, exuding formidable power. Night blue aura stood upright, his entire body enveloped in a blue aura, his eyes glowing in the darkness of his helmet. The surrounding citizens retreated in fear, witnessing the appearance of powerful forces. Damien turned, realizing he was surrounded by city guard soldiers. Governor Sebastian Baker appeared, pointing directly at Damien and roaring an angry accusation. Sebastian Robert and Cedric Walker stood opposite Damien, forming a powerful front. Damien faced Sebastian with a defiant gaze, completely unfazed by the governor's wrath. Robert loudly accused Damien before the crowd, while the surrounding citizens whispered in fear. Cedric's face contorted with anger, believing Damien would be punished under the governor's protection. To provoke, Damien snapped his fingers, signaling Cedric to step forward and confront him. A mocking smile appeared on Damien's face as he openly scoffed at the governor's judgment. Facing Sebastian's threat, Damien stood tall, sword in hand, completely unshaken. Losing all patience, Sebastian signaled his knight. A silent command to attack was given. A heavy armored foot stomped on the ground, signaling the start of the confrontation. Robert's colossal figure loomed, completely overshadowing Damien, who stood waiting. Robert pointed his weapon at Damien, ordering him to surrender, but Damien only responded with a defiant smile. Robert was stunned by Damien's unwavering confidence. Damien's gaze was as sharp as a knife, reflecting absolute confidence. Damien's smile grew more arrogant, as if he held victory in his grasp. Robert roared, unleashing a blue aura and charging to attack, forcing Damien to hastily raise his sword to block. In the midst of battle, Damien quickly glanced behind him, his eyes revealing an impatient anticipation. To buy time until reinforcements arrived, Damien braced himself, enduring the immense pressure from Robert's attack. Robert's power was too overwhelming. The impact sent Damien flying backward. Damien performed a skillful aerial flip to reduce the impact and land safely. Damien's arm trembled, dark energy cracks spreading as he gritted his teeth, enduring the aftershocks of the attack. Damien glanced to the side again, his anticipation growing more urgent. Giving Damien no second to rest, Robert charged, his blue aura flaring more intensely. Robert's speed made Damien's eyes widen in surprise. Robert swung an energy-clad punch directly at Damien. Damien barely dodged to the side as Robert's massive battle axe cleaved down, shattering the ground. The city guards recoiled in shock at the destructive power of the blow. Sebastian and Cedric gaped, horrified by the intensity of the battle. Robert suddenly froze, sensing a new and powerful presence that had just appeared on the battlefield. A slender hand was enveloped in blue holy flame. A white-haired female paladin appeared, pulling down her hood and shielding Damien, her holy aura clashing with Robert's presence. Robert froze, his face changing color as he recognized the intervention of a paladin from the church. Feeling relieved, Damien looked at his newly arrived ally with a smile, the tension on his face dissipating. At the same time, Victor ran at full speed towards the square, followed by two cloaked figures. Victor waved excitedly, happily announcing his presence. Cedric looked at the female paladin and the newcomers with horror, realizing the situation had completely reversed. The white-haired paladin and two cloaked guards arrived, her eyes full of vigilance as she assessed the situation. Damien Haxon pinched one of Victor's cheeks hard, his gaze showing both annoyance and teasing about his servant's delay. Facing the paladin, Damien maintained his confidence while Victor retreated behind his master, showing clear deference. Victor beamed, pinching his own cheeks with both hands to show his enthusiasm and pride for completing his assigned task. Memories flooded back, starting with the image of a large and solemn cathedral standing tall under the sun. Inside the sanctuary, a figure stood observing a group of worshippers kneeling in prayer before the altar. Among those praying, a white-haired nun raised her head, seemingly sensing something. The flashback shifted to Victor, panting as he arrived at the church gate holding a bag and a card. Victor entered, faced the white-haired nun and presented his urgent mission. With an urgent expression, Victor explained that his master had sent him to deliver evidence of someone collaborating with dark mages. The white-haired nun's eyes widened in astonishment at the shocking information. She calmly requested to see the evidence and Victor immediately handed her the card. As the nun touched the card, a faint but clear dark energy emanated from it. Her gaze focused on a lotus symbol carved on the card, a significant mark. Next, she took the cloth bag from Victor to examine the second piece of evidence. She grabbed the bundle of hair inside and pulled out a severed human head. Victor screamed in horror as he realized what he had been carrying. The nun's eyes glowed with holy energy as she identified the head as belonging to Ajito, a leader of the Yulan organization. Her hand clenched, her robe a resolute decision forming. She straightened up, paladin armor replacing her nun's habit, exuding a powerful and decisive aura. Back in the present, the paladin looked directly at Damien, her gaze sharp as if to confirm his identity. She stepped forward to Damien and Victor, announcing that the church had received the evidence and would handle everything. Governor Sebastian Baker and Cedric Walker hastily bowed, showing submission to the church's authority. The paladin placed a hand on her chest, bowing slightly in return, showing her solemnity. Damien wore a smug smile, satisfied that his plan was unfolding as intended. The image of a colossal golden cross appeared, symbolizing the power and faith of the Holy Church. Members of the church were seen benevolently distributing bread to the poor. But when facing heresy and demons, they became fanatical warriors, not hesitating to burn their souls to fight. Their vanguard force consisted of paladins, holy knights equipped with armor, shields, and swords, ready to annihilate all enemies. Damien looked at the paladin, keenly aware that this formidable force was now on his side. Standing in the middle of the square, the paladin raised her voice, drawing the attention of soldiers and citizens to make an important announcement. The declaration that the church was hunting a dark mage hiding in landwork caused a stir among the crowd. The paladin made a forceful statement asserting the church's authority to take over the city. Challenged Sebastian and Robert vehemently protested, refusing to accept the infringement of their autonomy. The paladin coldly retorted, asserting the church's authority surpassed all kingdom powers. Shadow fell across half of the paladin's face, revealing only her cold gaze and an undeniable accusation. She pointed directly at Robert and Sebastian, declaring them the main suspects in the case. Her finger then pointed at Cedric Walker, exposing him as the one who had hidden and aided the dark mage. Her knife-sharp gaze swept across, implying that merely protecting someone like Cedric was enough to condemn him. Robert angrily turned to question Cedric, who was frantically denying all accusations. The paladin crossed her arms, indifferent to Cedric's weak denials. She held up a ledger, declaring it contained all evidence of Cedric's illicit dealings. Cedric gnashed his teeth, his face contorted with rage as he realized he had been framed. While Cedric tried to explain himself in vain, the church's guardians surrounded him. With a cold wave of her hand, the paladin ordered the arrest of everyone. Removing her cloak to reveal her battle armor, the paladin oversaw the struggling arrests of Sebastian and Cedric. As he was escorted by a guardian, Sebastian glanced into the distance with resentment. There Damien and Victor stood with crossed arms, a smug smile on Damien's lips as his plan succeeded. Sebastian's face contorted in horror and anger, realizing he had been overthrown by Damien. Cedric desperately called out to Robert, urging him not to surrender in vain. Handcuffed and escorted by 2 guardians, Robert was led away like a criminal. Robert bowed his head, a deadly decision forming in silence. Desperate to survive, Robert broke his shackles, unleashing a powerful surge of energy. He gripped the hilt of his weapon, determined to carve a bloody path. With a defiant roar, Robert swung his weapon towards the paladin, ready to kill everyone to escape. Witnessing the chaos, Cedric flashed a sinister smile, hoping for a chance to escape. Damien observed from afar, his eyes gleaming with disdain at Robert's foolish action. Robert charged forward, his aura of power shaking the ground. One of the cloaked guardians extended a hand, effortlessly blocking Robert's full-force attack. Robert froze, unable to believe his eyes, as his attack was completely nullified. The guardian retaliated with an even more terrifying energy strike, completely overwhelming Robert's efforts. Cedric's smile vanished, replaced by utter horror at the church's unimaginable power. Witnessing his final opponent subdued, a cold, triumphant smile appeared on Damien's lips. The guardian's fist erupted with holy flame, ready to enact God's justice upon those who dared to resist. A punch imbued with dark energy shattered the target. From Robert's collapsing perspective, the paladin stood there, her fist ablaze with blue holy flame. With a cold gaze, the paladin delivered an unshakable verdict. Cedric Walker knelt, his hands tightly cuffed behind his back in humiliation. Meanwhile, Sebastian Baker frantically screamed in protest as he was dragged away by a church guardian. From a distance, Damien, Haxon, and Victor calmly observed the downfall of their enemy. Cedric gnashed his teeth, his face contorted with hatred and powerlessness. The paladin turned, her gaze fixed on Damien and Victor, and she approached to confront the true mastermind. In Damien's eyes, the paladin's blue aura flared, revealing a formidable power. An image appeared in his mind, the Azure Flame Brigandine, one of the 5 great saints, her master. Memories of the saint's legendary power effortlessly annihilating heretics flashed by. The paladin spoke, calling Damien Haxon by name. She stepped forward, expressing gratitude for his cooperation in taking down a Yulan officer. The paladin declared she would acknowledge Damien's contribution and exempt him from all responsibility. Damien gave a mischievous smile, pretending not to understand her implication. The paladin's gaze sharpened as she exposed Damien's plan to summon the church to cover up his own attack on Black Snake. In response, Damien bowed dramatically in an apologetic gesture, beginning to justify his actions. The paladin was stunned as Damien claimed the dark mage had not only cursed the territory but also threatened his family. Her eyes widened, his words having touched a weakness of hers. After a moment of consideration, the paladin's expression softened, accepting Damien's explanation. She crossed her arms, announcing that the bounty for Agito's head would soon be paid. An illusion of a mountain of gold appeared, overwhelming Victor, while Damien merely calculated coldly. Ignoring Victor's astonishment, Damien made a bold decision, refusing the hefty reward. He interrupted the paladin, his steady gaze indicating he wanted something entirely different. The paladin frowned, perplexed by the request of someone strong enough to destroy Black Snake on his own. Damien's gaze deepened, his resolve unwavering. Memories of the life or death battle with the dark mage Agito flooded his mind. He recalled the clear realization that his current power would not be enough to face greater enemies in the future. A vision of brutal battles against countless powerful foes emerged. And then the silhouette of the person he once was, the Death Knight, appeared, a reminder of the pinnacle of power he had to reach. Memories of training alone showed the limitations of the basic techniques he possessed. Back in reality, Damien frankly requested an advanced cultivation technique, completely stunning the paladin with the fact that he had reached this level with only rudimentary knowledge. In the depths of the female paladin's azure eyes, Damien's image was reflected, radiating a powerful aura of energy. She recognized his extraordinary talent and determination, and ideas suddenly sparking in her mind. With a meaningful smile, she offered an alternative to the reward. Agnes extended her hand, a solemn and radiant invitation, inviting him to join her ranks as a paladin. Damien remained silent, his cold gaze devoid of expression, while Victor behind him showed clear astonishment. He decisively refused, causing the female paladin's elation to instantly shatter into extreme disappointment. Standing with crossed arms, Damien coldly watched the female paladin, questioning his decision. Her face darkened, her eyes burning with fanaticism as she emphasized the sacred honor he had just rejected. She moved closer, her voice full of pressure, while Damien and Victor remained in their positions. Damien secretly scoffed at the idea of being a church minion, his eyes gleaming with contempt. He quickly hid his true feelings, his expression becoming pensive to prepare for a lie. Damien placed a hand on his chest, bowing his head with feigned humility, indicating he felt unworthy of such a great honor. He looked up, his eyes filled with feigned reverence, declaring his intention to follow in the divine footsteps as a humble devotee. The female paladin was stunned, completely convinced by Damien's act. Deeply moved, she took Damien's hand, her eyes sparkling with emotion at his holy words. She happily agreed to Damien's request for a mana cultivation technique instead of a reward, while still extending an invitation for him to join the church. Damien smiled and politely agreed, but in his heart he knew that would never happen. To solidify his trust, she formally introduced herself as Agnes, the first disciple of Azure Flame. Damien responded with a polite smile, secretly confirming the information he already knew. After achieving his goal, Damien turned to Agnes and asked to finish his business, making Victor behind him break out in a cold sweat. Damien approached Cedric Walker, who was kneeling on the ground, the boss's eyes filled with horror. Damien grabbed Cedric Walker by the collar and lifted him, his cold gaze casting a shadow over the man's terrified face. To vent his anger and finish what was left undone, Damien delivered a powerful punch directly to Cedric Walker's stomach. The boss collapsed, clutching his stomach and coughing violently on the ground. Cedric looked up, his face contorted with pain and hatred, uttering curses. Without hesitation, Damien delivered a brutal kick to Cedric's face, ending all resistance. The kick sent Cedric flying, while Agnes and Victor could only watch in shock. Damien let out a sigh of relief, the tension on his face dissipating. He placed his hand on his chest where blue energy faintly glowed, feeling satisfied as he stood over his unconscious enemy's body. Victor timidly approached, whispering to ask if everything was truly over. Damien turned back with a mysterious smile, his gaze directed towards a distant place, signaling a new beginning. A magnificent mansion belonging to the Marquis Lionbloom family appeared under the sunlight, the next target in his plan. Holland Lionbloom burst through the door, roaring a panicked call. Inside, an old butler stood frozen before the bed, where a figure trembled under the blanket. Erwin Holland's son woke with a start, his eyes wide with panic as he recognized his father. A pair of leather boots quietly walked away, leaving the chaotic scene. Holland rushed to support his trembling son, grabbing his collar and pressing him about what had happened. Erwin stammered out his account in extreme horror, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Holland gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing as he saw his son's fear, and he turned to order the guards. The soldier stood at attention, awaiting orders from his enraged master. After hearing his son's accusation, Holland's fists clenched, his determination for revenge clearly etched on his face. His rage made the decorative vase on the cabinet tremble. It fell shattering into pieces on the floor. The invisible force from Holland's anger caused other objects to shatter as well, leaving the soldier and butler standing still in fear. A cruel smile appeared on Holland's lips, an unspoken vow of revenge made. The phantom of a fiery lion, the family's emblem, appeared behind him, reflecting his murderous rage. At the Haxon mansion, a completely different atmosphere prevailed. A delegation from the church led by Agnes grandly entered. Viscount Haxon and his wife bowed in welcome, looking confused and anxious. From behind, Damien Haxon appeared, startling his father, Viscount Haxon, who secretly resented it. Viscount Haxon tried to be polite to Agnes, explaining the mansion's crampedness. In response, Agnes handed him a heavy bag of money as a gift, making Viscount Haxon visibly delighted. Afterwards, Agnes approached Damien to speak privately, while his parents stood at a distance with satisfied expression. Damien maintained a calm expression, but the image of Agnes making another request briefly flashed. Agnes began the conversation, her gaze entirely focused on Damien. With a radiant smile and reverent eyes, she expressed her admiration for him. Viscount Haxon and his wife secretly listened from afar, looking curious and surprised. Damien maintained an indifferent expression despite his parents making incorrect assumptions. Agnes formally handed Damien 2 hardcover books. Damien took them, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. 2 ancient tomes appeared, one on energy techniques, the other on destructive sword techniques. Agnes explained the difficulty in acquiring them, emphasizing the opposition from within the church. Damien responded with a nearly imperceptible smile, a subtle acknowledgement of her effort. To solidify Damien's trust, Agnes took his hand and once again earnestly invited him to become a paladin. Damien Haxon gently declined Agnes's offer, his hand withdrawing decisively. With feigned teary eyes, Damien bowed his head, expressing regret for not being able to join the church. Agnes nodded understandingly, then smiled and extended an open invitation, encouraging him to seek her out if he changed his mind. She turned and left, leaving Damien alone in the room. Damien watched her retreating back, his eyes sharp and calculating, his plan having succeeded. Elsewhere, the entrance to a secret cave hidden in the dense forest appeared. Inside the lair, 2 church investigators were examining the remaining items. The light-haired investigator spoke using gestures to express his suspicion to his colleague. He became serious, emphasizing the absurdity of the story about Ajito, a notorious dark mage. He continued to argue, stating that it was unbelievable for a high-level mage like Ajito to be killed by a rural noble. The dark-haired investigator lowered his magnifying glass, his expression agreeing with the skepticism but also showing helplessness. The two looked at each other, wondering what to do next, as the investigation seemed to have reached a dead end. Agnes suddenly appeared, her resolute voice interrupting the discussion, affirming her absolute faith in Damien. The 2 investigators startled and turned around astonished to find their superior standing behind them. Agnes calmly confronted their skepticism, asserting that Damien had not lied. Agnes's memories flooded back, replaying Damien's incredibly simple explanation for defeating Ajito. Skepticism was still evident on the light-haired investigator's face. Agnes closed her eyes, recalling the moment she realized Damien's true power. The memory took her back to that day when she secretly observed Damien from a distance. In a chaotic battle, Damien single-handedly overwhelmed dozens of attackers without suffering any harm. In a blurred movement, Damien swung his sword, creating a brilliant aura to directly confront the enemy. He used his own sword to shatter an incoming magical fireball. Back in reality, the 2 investigators were stunned, unable to believe what they had just heard. Agnes opened her eyes, magical light flashing around her as she explained the capabilities of a sword master. She clarified that even though Damien was not yet a sword master, his power was undeniably extraordinary. Agnes's eyes gleamed with determination, revealing her true goal: to turn Damien into an invaluable asset for the church. She ordered her 2 subordinates to cast aside all doubts and focus on completing the investigation. The 2 investigators bowed in obedience, no longer daring to question her decision. Meanwhile, in a suburb, horse hooves were approaching on the dirt road. Under the clear sky, a cavalry troop bearing the lion emblem of the Lionbloom family was approaching, signaling an impending confrontation. A large apprentice knight named Ulpus, riding on horseback, stretched refreshingly after a long journey. His comrade, another apprentice knight named Lavender, grimaced in disdain at the scent of the countryside. A knight complained about the stench, but Garrick, their commander, ordered him to be silent in a sharp voice. Garrick's face, that of an official knight of the Lionbloom family, clearly showed a stern and cruel expression. Leading a troop of knights, Garrick directed his gaze towards the Haxon mansion in the distance. Garrick turned to ask Ulpus, who was holding the standard, to reconfirm their mission from the Marquis. Ulpus and Lavender, another knight, rode alongside Ulpus, confirming their mission was to apprehend Damien Haxon. Garrick snorted in contempt, believing that apprehending Damien would be easy. His eyes grew colder, harboring the intention to avenge the humiliation suffered by the Marquis and Irwin. The knight troop passed an old man walking with difficulty, leaning on a cane. Garrick and his knights rode past, leaving the old man behind. Garrick suddenly stopped his horse, calling the old man back, which startled him. The shadows of the knights loomed over the old man, exuding an overwhelming threat as he fearfully looked up. Garrick gestured with his chin, asking the old man if he was a resident of the Haxon domain, and he tremblingly confirmed. A blur flashed as Garrick struck mercilessly, knocking the elderly man to the ground. Garrick gripped his sword hilt, his eyes full of anger, believing the old man had committed a crime by not bowing to the Lionbloom standard. The old man lay sprawled on the ground, cruelly punished. Ulpus confusedly pointed out that the old man seemed blind, but Garrick ignored him and called the names of his 2 subordinates. A wicked and brutal smile appeared on Garrick's face as he outlined a new plan. Meanwhile, a servant was sweeping the front yard of the Haxon mansion. Victor, with his large round eyes and freckles, suddenly looked up with vigilance. The boy was horrified as he envisioned the Lionbloom knights massacring everything in sight. Elsewhere, Agnes and her 2 investigators stood near a cliff. Agnes reassured her subordinates that they had done well despite not gathering much information due to the collapsed site. Suddenly, one of the investigators pointed forward, drawing the attention of the entire group. They were astonished to see Damien meditating on a rock, a swirling burst of blue energy surrounding him. A powerful flow of mana enveloped Damien, demonstrating incredible energy control. A leaf was drawn into the vortex of energy around Damien. The energy flow suddenly intensified, propelling the leaf away with great force. Agnes was stunned, her eyes wide open, unable to believe the extraordinary sight before her. She realized this was the cultivation technique she had given Damien, but couldn't comprehend how he had mastered it in just a few hours. The energy flow converged, small electric sparks flashing around Damien's body as he fully absorbed them. Damien slowly exhaled, opened his eyes, and saw Agnes's group looking at him with undisguised admiration. He calmly stepped down from the rock, approaching Agnes and her investigators. With a satisfied gaze, Agnes acknowledged Damien's progress as he returned the cultivation book. Damien looked at the book, blue energy emanating from it as he recalled his training process. In a quiet night, Damien meditated, absorbing blue energy from his surroundings into his body. Agnes was speechless at Damien's remarkable progress, unable to utter a word. As Agnes was about to invite Damien to dinner, she noticed his expression suddenly become distant. Suddenly Damien flinched, a cold surge of killing intent emanating from afar, putting him on alert. Damien's face turned icy cold and he informed Agnes of the arrival of uninvited guests. His eyes sparking with blue light, Damien signaled to Agnes that he had to go deal with an urgent matter. Without further explanation, Damien shot away like an arrow, leaving Agnes bewildered. Agnes and her two investigators were stunned, their eyes wide with astonishment at Damien's incredible speed. As a leaf gently fell to the ground, Agnes realized Damien had moved with extremely precise energy control. With blazing red eyes and iron determination, Damien surged forward, heading towards the threat. At the same time, at the Haxon mansion, a cruel iron-clad fist lunged forward. Lavender delivered a vicious punch to Victor's stomach, causing him to double over in pain. The knight sneered savagely as Victor collapsed to the ground. From horseback, Garrick roared a command demanding the surrender of Damien Haxon while his soldiers tormented a civilian. His face bruised, Victor still struggled to get up and shouted, determined not to let them harm his master. Hearing the commotion, Paul Haxon and a maid rushed out of the mansion in a panic. Lavender immediately blocked Paul Haxon's path, his attitude full of defiance. Paul Haxon stared at the invaders, his face etched with anger. He rushed to support the severely injured Victor, his eyes filled with worry and pain. Kneeling beside his loyal servant, Paul Haxon roared, questioning the knight's brutal actions. From behind, Garrick looked down at them with contempt, declaring that this was nothing compared to what the Haxon family had caused. Garrick's figure on horseback became colossal and menacing as he conveyed the Marquis Lionbloom's demand: surrender Damien Haxon. Paul Haxon looked at the invaders with indignation, recognizing the boundless cruelty of the Lionbloom family. Garrick smirked wickedly, revealing his true intention, that he would spare no one whether Damien was surrendered or not. Paul Haxon gritted his teeth, realizing Garrick's promise was merely a deadly trap. Paul Haxon's eyes blazed with the fire of defiance as he made his final decision. Facing Garrick, Paul Haxon boldly declared that he would never surrender his son. Garrick's smile vanished, replaced by a deadly cold expression as he ordered his soldiers to destroy everything. Paul Haxon screamed in horror and rage at Garrick's command for slaughter. He was stunned, unable to believe the madness and cruelty of those who called themselves knights. A figure enveloped in terrifying dark energy appeared from nowhere, startling Lavender and Opus into vigilance. Garrick narrowed his eyes, the complacency on his face vanishing, replaced by bewilderment at the sudden presence. Damien calmly approached, ignoring the growling Lavender, who was issuing a silent challenge. A chill ran down Garrick's spine as he realized his body had suddenly stiffened. Under an invisible pressure emanating from Damien, all enemies and even his father were pinned to the ground, unable to move. When the pressure dissipated, Damien immediately knelt to support his father, Paul Haxon, his eyes quickly scanning to check for injuries. Damien's gaze then settled on Victor's bruised body, his concern transforming into a chilling rage. A deadly smile flickered across Damien's lips as he issued a silent warning to those who had caused this. Lavender and Opus staggered to their feet, completely failing to comprehend Damien's recent threat. Garrick sneered, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Damien, accusing him of being a madman who dared to challenge the Marquise's authority. Damien's eyes sharpened at Garrick's accusation. With a contemptuous flick of his head, Garrick ordered his two knights to attack, determined to crush Damien's defiance. Damien simply leaned easily, dodging the coordinated attack of the two knights. To display his superior strength, Damien used his bare hand to stop Lavender's incoming sword strike. Destructive energy converged in Damien's palm, crushing Lavender's glove and bones, making him scream in extreme pain. Without a moment's hesitation, Damien delivered a punch straight to Lavender's face, ending his fight. Alpin screamed in horror as he witnessed his comrade fall, but still blindly charged forward. Before Opus could react, Damien's spinning kick struck him directly in the jaw. The force of the kick sent Opus flying backward, hitting the ground hard and falling unconscious. From horseback, Garrick was stunned, unable to believe the speed and ruthlessness he had just witnessed. Victor slowly opened his eyes, the blurry figure of his master appearing before him. Standing between the two defeated enemies, Damien turned, his voice softening as he called out to his loyal servant. Despite his aching body, Victor still tremblingly reached out to Damien. A faint smile full of trust and relief appeared on his bruised face. Damien was momentarily surprised by Victor's resilience and unwavering loyalty. Damien's rage dissipated, replaced by a warm smile full of appreciation for his servant's fortitude. The sound of metal hitting the ground indicated Garrick dismounting his horse, showing he would handle this himself. Garrick slowly advanced towards Damien, each step heavy with menace. He glanced at his two unconscious subordinates, the initial contempt in his eyes now replaced by careful calculation. Damien stood tall, becoming a living shield for his father and servant, his gaze unwavering. Garrick's eyes narrowed, a piece of the puzzle seemingly clicking into place in his mind. Garrick tilted his head skyward, a self-satisfied and astonished smile appearing as he believed he had understood the source of Damien's power. Garrick pointed at Damien, roaring a silent accusation, asserting that he was not Damien Haxon. From behind, Viscount Haxon watched the scene with a bewildered expression, not understanding what was happening. Damien faced the accusation with a cold gaze, casually asking a question in return. Garrick's rage erupted, his face contorted in a silent roar. He pointed directly at Damien, accusing him of being part of a conspiracy against the Lionbloom family. With a look of disdain, Damien listened to the accusation that he was an impostor hired to tarnish Erwin Lionbloom's reputation. Damien sighed in exasperation at his opponent's foolishness while Garrick drew his claymore from its sheath. With a furious roar, Garrick swung his claymore up, preparing to attack. His gloved hand gripped the sword hilt tightly, pouring all his strength into it. Opus, still lying on the ground, peeked open his eyes, deciding to continue feigning unconsciousness to observe the situation. In the distance, Victor was helped to his feet by Viscount Haxon, both directing hopeful and anxious gazes towards Damien. Garrick tightened his grip on his weapon, preparing for a decisive attack. He charged forward, his imposing figure overwhelming, aiming directly at Damien, who stood still waiting. Garrick's eyes flashed with deadly self-satisfaction, believing victory was within his grasp. He took a decisive step, blue energy swirling up from the ground, marking his attack range. From an overhead view, Garrick lunged into the space in front of Damien, an invisible trap already set. Garrick charged forward at dizzying speed, determined to cleave his opponent in two with a single blow. His massive claymore slashed down, leaving a blazing red streak in the air. Garrick put all his strength into the downward strike, certain that nothing could stop it. But the attack was abruptly blocked, Damien's blade stopping the claymore right in front of him. Damien smirked cruelly, drawing his short sword to confront him directly. Garrick was stunned, unable to believe his full-force thrust had been neutralized so easily. He brushed aside his doubt, assuming it was just luck, and prepared for the next attack. Garrick unleashed a horizontal sword strike at terrifying speed, leaving a blazing red streak in the air. Damien stood still, Garrick's sword strikes cutting through the air around him but unable to touch him. Extreme astonishment was evident on Garrick's face as he realized the speed difference. Damien's eyes flashed with blue light and he declared his turn to attack had come. Garrick's vision was just a blur as Damien lunged, delivering a lightning-fast attack. A cut appeared on Garrick's face, blood spurting from the unseen strike. Garrick roared in pain, completely helpless against Damien's speed. Damien continued to press close, delivering a punch to the knight's flank. To end the match, Damien spun and delivered a high kick directly to Garrick's face. Garrick was sent flying into the air by an immense force, his body spinning uncontrollably. He fell face down onto the ground while Damien stood there calmly looking down at the defeated foe. Damien's gaze was sharp as a knife, a silent declaration made to avenge Victor. Garrick tremblingly propped himself up with his sword, his eyes filled with terror and disbelief as he looked at Damien. His rage flared. Garrick let out a wild roar and charged forward, swinging his claymore with all his might. Damien did not flinch, his eyes coldly observing the approaching attack. Blazing red energy erupted from Garrick, transforming into demonic claws that lunged straight towards Damien. With a contemptuous smirk, Damien extended his short sword, ready to face the storm of energy. His sword tip gleamed, ready to prove that this flashy attack was utterly useless. Damien's sword tip lightly touched an energy claw, causing it to immediately crack and shatter. Garrick was stunned, horrified to see his ultimate technique neutralized so easily. To end the match, Damien swung his sword, a blue light streak flashing. From his slash, a colossal blue energy dragon emerged, roaring as it lunged towards Garrick. Garrick only managed a desperate scream as the attack struck. His body was engulfed in the energy surge sent flying once more. From a distance, Viscount Haxon and Victor flinched as they witnessed the scene. Joy and hope erupted on Victor's bruised face as he realized his master had won. Damien coldly looked down at Garrick writhing on the ground. Garrick gritted his teeth, clutching his shoulder in extreme pain. Suddenly, Damien's cold sword tip was pressed against Garrick's neck. In extreme panic, Garrick stammered a plea for his life, but Damien just stood there, his silhouette obscuring the sun, a silent assertion of his identity. Damien subtly shook his head, a cold smile fleetingly appearing, implying that the plea was too late. His gaze grew colder as he reminded Garrick of the crimes he had committed against his family and servant. Garrick hastily bowed his head, stammering apologies in desperation. A knowing smile appeared on Damien's lips and he subtly nodded in another direction, signaling that the apology was misdirected. Damien turned and walked away, leaving Garrick lying there in confusion and fear. Garrick looked up, realizing Damien was heading towards Viscount Haxon and Victor. The shadows of Victor and Viscount Haxon fell upon Garrick, the boy holding a wooden stick, his eyes burning with hatred. In the background, Opus and Lavender knelt in submission, bowing their heads before the irresistible power. Victor eagerly asked for permission to take revenge, but Damien stopped him and a terrifying smile appeared as he proposed an even more dreadful punishment. At that moment, Viscount Haxon placed a hand on Damien's shoulder, his stern gaze ordering his son to stop. Recognizing the presence of the family head, Garrick quickly prostrated himself, begging for forgiveness from Viscount Haxon. Viscount Haxon roared suppressed rage in every muscle of his face as he pointed out the worthlessness of an apology. In his anger, an image appeared: Garrick tied up and dragged away, facing a tragic fate at the hands of the Marquis. Before him, Garrick prostrated himself, desperately pleading for mercy. Viscount Haxon fell silent, his anger temporarily subsiding before the pathetic plea. Nearby, Damien closed his eyes with a discreet smile, completely unaffected by the chaos. He shook his head slightly, signaling to his father that there was another way. Standing over the defeated enemy, Damien casually explained that killing them would completely sever diplomatic relations. His eyes briefly showed worry, realizing he could not act alone while still needing to protect his family. Damien looked down at the kneeling figure, considering his next move to avoid future retaliation. Suddenly, a voice calling his name made Damien turn around. A woman in armor, Agnes, rushed towards them, her face full of concern. Damien's eyes widened, a new and bold plan suddenly flashing in his mind. Agnes charged forward, her appearance inadvertently becoming the key to Damien's solution. After the situation was explained, Agnes rested her chin in thought, evaluating the problem from the church's perspective. She raised a finger, offering a solution beneficial to both sides. Agnes explained that thanks to the Haxon family's actions, they had been able to eliminate a member of their common enemy. Damien's face lit up as he realized the golden opportunity to turn this crisis into a powerful alliance. Standing behind, Victor and Viscount Haxon looked at each other with skepticism. Agnes excitedly took Damien's hand, delighted to have found a strong ally. In a moment, no one saw, a sinister smile and glowing red eyes revealed Damien's true plan to gain the church's protection. Damien politely led Agnes away while Victor and his father watched, trying to understand his intention. Damien turned to face his enemy, his voice ringing with authority, ensuring everyone clearly heard the new agreement. Garrick received the order, his face bitter as he had to convey the message of his defeat in the Haxon family's new alliance. Damien watched with cold self-satisfaction, his plan perfectly successful. His eyes glowed once more, a final threat of the church's wrath unleashed like a sword strike. Victor let out a triumphant roar, raising his staff to the sky as his enemies fled headlong. Victor's joy quickly vanished, replaced by anxiety about what was to come. Viscount Haxon crossed his arms, his voice resolute, summoning an urgent family meeting to discuss the future. Light streamed through the heavy curtains in the Haxon family's meeting room. The entire Haxon family gathered around the meeting table, with Agnes standing in a corner as Viscount Haxon declared the start. Viscountess Haxon and her daughter listened intently as the topic of the feud with the Lionbloom family was brought up. Haxon's youngest son raised his hand, his face confused, questioning the necessity of the meeting when they were already protected by the church. In the meeting room, Viscount Haxon sternly explained the family's disadvantageous situation as Abel and Louise listened. With his hands clasped, Viscount Haxon emphasized that the enemy's strength was not only in their army. A visualization of the power imbalance appeared, a small family kneeling before a colossal force. Damien listened thoughtfully, considering survival options for his family. Suddenly, a voice rang out, drawing the attention of the entire Haxon family. Agnes appeared, enthusiastically extending her hands to propose an unexpected solution for Damien to become a paladin. Damien coldly gave a blunt refusal, to the astonishment of the entire family. Agnes stepped back, her face disappointed as her offer was rejected, while Viscount Haxon accepted his son's decision. Unable to restrain himself, Abel slammed his hands on the table, standing up abruptly to question his father. Damien gently pushed his glasses, a sharp glint in his eyes as he questioned his younger brother's impulsiveness. With a condescending look, Abel pointed at Damien, mocking his brother's unnecessary complexity. Viscount Haxon slammed his hand on the table, ordering Abel to sit down in a tone that brooked no resistance. A ghostly, murderous shadow appeared behind Damien, making Abel freeze in fear. Completely subdued, Abel slumped into his chair, the entire room plunged into tense silence. Viscount Haxon affirmed that although Damien had caused the conflict, it was not entirely his fault. Viscountess Haxon spoke in defense, explaining that Damien had acted to protect Louise from others' malicious intentions. She emphasized that Damien had done the part of a helpless father, making Viscount Haxon bow his head in shame. Viscount Haxon stood up, his hand placed on the table with new determination. He walked behind Damien, his large hand resting on his son's shoulder. With a proud gaze, Viscount Haxon acknowledged Damien's brave actions. Damien looked up at his father, a fleeting surprise appearing on his usually calm face. He humbly bowed his head to accept the praise while Abel sat beside him, turning his face away in a sulk. Viscount Haxon declared he would bear the responsibility himself while his wife held Louise's hand to reassure her. Damien looked at his father with respect as he demonstrated his role as head of the family. The meeting room door opened, a servant announcing a visitor from the Goldpixie family. The Goldpixie messenger stood at the door timidly, facing Viscount Haxon's inquiring gaze. The messenger nervously reported that Damien had used the family's wheat fields to mortgage an overdue debt. Viscount Haxon was stunned, his hand on Damien's shoulder tightening. Rage made Viscount Haxon tremble violently while Damien maintained a terrifying composure. Viscount Haxon roared his son's name, his fury erupting as he grabbed Damien by the collar. His angry roar seemed to echo throughout the Haxon mansion. In the hallway, Haxon's servant too bowed as Damien walked past. Olan Demishi, the manager of a pawn shop, arrived with 2 muscular bodyguards, bowing falsely to announce the repayment date. Memories flooded Damien's mind, recalling Olan's sweet words enticing him to mortgage the family's land. Back in the present, Damien faced the 3 men asking about the debt amount with a worried expression. Olan held up 3 fingers with a smug smile, announcing the increased debt amount, completely stunning Damien. Shock was evident on Damien's face as he realized his family could not afford this enormous sum. A terrible vision appeared in his mind, the entire family cast out onto the streets begging for food amidst the contempt of passers-by. Olan coldly reminded him that the land would be confiscated, Damien questioning the promise that it was just a formality. With a sinister smile, Olan cited orders from Duke Goldpixie, whose family crest gleamed powerfully. Cold sweat ran down Damien's face as Olan delivered the ultimatum, forcing him to pay immediately. Olan's eyes turned sharp, he leaned forward, pressing him with a threatening tone. Damien bowed his head, his voice low as he admitted he could not prepare enough money. Olan tilted his head, feigning surprise at the answer. Olan's smile twisted into a sinister, cruel laugh as he achieved his goal. He leaned back in his chair, arrogantly looking down at Damien like a victor. Olan clasped his hands behind his head, showing extreme contempt for Damien's predicament. He cracked his knuckles, a gesture signaling the impending violence. 2 bodyguards approached Damien from behind, their shadows engulfing him, radiating murderous intent. Olan revealed his morbid pleasure at witnessing this moment. An image appeared in Olan's mind, him stepping on the head of a kneeling, pleading nobleman. He relished imagining the desperate expression Damien was about to show. Olan leaned his head back, panting in extreme morbid excitement. Meanwhile, at the Haxon mansion, Paul Haxon sighed deeply, his heart heavy with worry. He paced restlessly in the living room while Abel fidgeted with tension. Viscountess Haxon gently sipped her tea, using her gaze to signal her husband and son to calm down. Paul and Abel protested in unison, despairingly, claiming that the future of their entire family was at stake. The Viscountess and Louise remained steadfast in their belief, asserting that Damien would resolve everything. Paul dismissed it frantically, shouting that Damien's combat skills were useless in a negotiation. Memories of Damien's terrifying power on the battlefield flashed through Paul's mind. At the same time, Damien unexpectedly struck, delivering a devastating punch to the long-haired bodyguard's face. Olan flinched on the sofa, astonished by Damien's sudden violent action. Without hesitation, Damien grabbed the scarred bodyguard's hair, effortlessly lifting him off the ground. The long-haired bodyguard struggled to his feet, rage erupting, and drew his sword, lunging at Damien for revenge. Damien raised his hand, and a surge of dark energy gathered around his arm. Without hesitation, Damien unleashed the energy through the scarred bodyguard's throat. As the remaining bodyguard drew his sword, Damien seized him, effortlessly lifting him into the air. A cruel and calculating smile appeared on Damien's face, signaling that this was merely justifiable self-defense. Witnessing the scene, Olan shrieked, his entire body recoiling in horror. Damien coldly turned his back on the fallen men, heading straight for the terrified Olan. Damien's imposing figure loomed, dominating Olan, who trembled at his feet. Damien gave a silent command, his cold gaze forcing Olan to kneel upright on the sofa. Olan stammered, attempting to negotiate, but Damien merely stood there, listening indifferently. Damien leaned down, his bloodied hand gripping Olan's shoulder, making an offer that could not be refused. Olan swallowed, sweat pouring as he was forced to accept the agreement in extreme fear. The next day, sunlight shone upon the Haxon mansion. In a room, Abel pushed up his glasses, complaining to his father about the recent injustice. At the same time outside, Damien calmly reassured his mother and Louise before departing. Abel dramatically cried out to the heavens while Viscount Haxon ordered him to stop his nonsense. Viscount Haxon turned away, his face clearly showing worry despite reluctantly approving his son's plan. Damien spotted Agnes waiting in the courtyard and she smiled, greeting him. He walked towards Agnes to say goodbye, expressing gratitude for her help. Agnes gracefully rested her chin, announcing that she would also be leaving soon after completing her work. With a warm smile and a surrounding blessed light, Agnes sincerely wished Damien a safe journey. Damien firmly declined an unspoken offer from Agnes, which surprised her slightly. After the farewell concluded, Damien returned to the carriage where Victor was waiting. The luxurious carriage door opened, revealing the carpeted floor inside. Damien and Victor stepped inside, finding Olan huddled in fear on the opposite seat. Olan quickly fawned, promising meticulous service throughout the journey. Damien raised a finger, pleased with Olan's attitude and promising a lavish lunch. Receiving the command from Damien, Victor excitedly raised his hand to signal the coachman. Victor poked his head out the window, excitedly shouting to signal departure. The horse neighed loudly, rearing up before beginning to gallop. The wheels began to roll, moving the carriage forward. From inside the carriage, Damien smiled meaningfully. His plan had officially begun. The carriage sped along the dusty road, heading straight for the Goldpixie family's territory. From above, Damien, Haxon, Victor and Olan Demishi stood on the cobblestone courtyard in front of a luxurious carriage. Their small figures contrasted with the grandeur of Goldpixie Manor, a massive and opulent architectural structure. Damien turned to Olan with a promising smile while Olan bowed subserviently, hastily agreeing. For a moment, rage flared in Olan's eyes as he recalled being forced to serve Damien, but he quickly concealed it. Olan forced a smile, secretly wishing for Damien's plan to fail, while Damien turned his back and walked away with confidence. Damien turned back, a confident smile on his lips, while Victor and Olan watched with mixed emotion. Damien stepped inside, his demeanor calm, his hand firmly gripping his staff. Seated behind a large desk, a long-haired man, Adam Goldpixie, looked up, assessing the uninvited guests. Damien merely smiled politely, but in his mind he secretly disdained these powerful individuals. Standing in the center of the large room, Damien faced Adam the guard, Jael Heimlich and other knights, directly questioning the purpose of the meeting. Damien calmly admitted he was a client of the Goldpixie family with an overdue debt. He went on to explain that he was not here to pay with money but by another means. Damien's presence became overwhelming as he made his audacious offer to defeat the Lionbloom family to settle the debt. Adam and Jael Heimlich were both stunned by Damien's arrogance. The knights standing behind, led by a scarred blonde man, also could not hide their astonishment. Jael Heimlich burst into laughter at the audacity, while Adam merely smiled profoundly, realizing Damien was aware of the current situation. Memories of recent rumors flooded Damien's mind. A gold mine had been discovered in the disputed border region between the Lionbloom and Goldpixie families. To resolve the dispute, the two families, who already disliked each other, had planned a duel between knights. But Damien knew the outcome of this duel beforehand. A lone warrior of the Lionbloom house stood on the ruined battlefield, signaling their overwhelming victory. With the new gold source, the Lionbloom house's power surged while the Goldpixie house declined. Back in the present, Damien crossed his arms, a confident smile evident as he envisioned helping Adam win to repay the debt and curb the opponent. Adam narrowed his eyes, a sinister smile appearing as he recognized the great ambition behind Damien's offer. Damien asserted that the rumors of his exploits were not fiction, his attitude full of confidence. Adam's eyes gleamed with interest and he admitted that he was looking for a knight for the duel. Ernst Howitz, the blonde knight, was stunned when Damien nominated himself as the perfect candidate to face the Lionbloom family's eldest son. Adam showed skepticism, reminding Damien of his opponent's reputation as a genius. Damien smirked, preparing to assert his capabilities when he was interrupted by a voice. Ernst Howitz stepped forward, loudly protesting, arguing that exaggerated rumors could not be trusted. Ernst continued, asserting that someone named Miss Chelsea would surely bring a more perfect candidate. An image appeared of Miss Chelsea, the mysterious woman who had set out to find a champion for the Goldpixie house. Adam smiled in agreement with Ernst's words, expressing confidence in Chelsea's abilities. Ernst and the other knights showed satisfaction at the Duke's agreement. Ernst Howitz looked at Damien Haxon with disdain, annoyance clearly visible on his face. Adam Goldpixie sat behind his desk, leisurely posing a question to challenge Damien's reaction. Damien faced the knights, his gaze firm, ready to make his declaration. To claim the position, Damien pointed to himself confidently, offering to be the representative for the upcoming duel. Damien offered a provocative smile, proposing to block Ernst's strongest attack as proof. The audacious offer momentarily stunned Ernst's surprise, clearly visible on his face. Rage flared on Ernst's face while Damien responded with a sinister smile, his eyes glowing red. Insulted Ernst turned to Adam, bowing and asking permission to teach Damien a lesson. Adam Goldpixie smiled with amusement, crossed his arms, and granted the knight's request. In a large arena, Damien and Ernst stood facing each other, preparing for the showdown witnessed by Adam and the knights. Damien turned back to reassure a panicked Victor, signaling his servant to step back. Ernst tensed, a fierce flame-like energy erupting from his body, putting Damien on alert. From his throne, Adam signaled for the match to begin. Ernst's figure loomed and he looked down at Damien condescendingly, striking his spear shaft hard against the ground as a warning. Damien yawned indifferently to provoke, causing Ernst's rage to flare even more intensely. Blue energy swirled around Ernst's hand as he tightened his grip on the spear shaft, preparing for the attack. His entire body enveloped in energy, Ernst soared into the air, ready for a deadly dive. A flicker of worry crossed Damien's face as he realized the power of the incoming attack. With a furious roar, Ernst plunged down like an arrow, his glowing spear tip aimed directly at Damien. Ernst charged with terrifying speed, leaving a blur in the air. To prove his strength, Damien calmly raised his sword, his eyes intensely focused on the incoming spear tip. Damien's blade blocked the incoming spear tip in a tense moment. Damien braced himself, enduring the immense impact force from the attack. Ernst's powerful attack was completely blocked by Damien. Under the pressure, Ernst's spear tip shattered into pieces on the ground. Damien wore a smug smile, thinking he had won. However, Ernst revealed a malicious smile, disclosing that the previous attack was merely a feint. A sharp black object suddenly pierced Damien's chest, the result of a spectacular trick. Victor screamed in horror while Adam and Jael Heimlich were stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Damien stomped his foot hard on the ground, gathering strength to remain standing after the fatal blow. Despite the wound, Damien tensed and stood upright, preventing his body from falling. Ernst's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of extreme shock as he saw Damien still standing. Adam Goldpixie and Jael Heimlich stared, unable to believe what was happening. Damien, with the wound on his chest, raised his sword and gave a triumphant smile, asserting that the right to represent now belonged to him. In a panic, Victor rushed to embrace Damien, causing him to stagger from the unexpected impact. Victor held his master tightly, his face showing clear worry, while Damien grimaced in pain and tried to push his servant away. Adam Goldpixie clapped politely, his eyes showing appreciation for Damien. A smile full of hidden meaning and calculation appeared on Adam's face as he recognized the young man's potential. Adam raised his hand, solemnly declaring before his vassals that Damien Haxon had proven his capability and would be the representative. Ernst Howitz stepped forward, his face incredulous and full of indignation, trying to voice his objection to the Duke's decision. Adam narrowed his eyes, a sharp look immediately quelling Ernst's resistance, signaling him not to spoil his mood. Damien stood alone, hands on his hips, looking down at the broken sword hilt in his other hand, his expression pensive as he re-analyzed the match. From behind, Ernst trembled with anger as he looked at Damien, realizing he had been defeated by an unforeseen opponent. Damien smirked, smugly aware that his true power far exceeded the level he outwardly displayed. Memories of the match flashed, showing that Damien had to put on a weak performance to deceive Ernst Howitz. In the decisive moment, a swirl of purple energy around Damien's chest secretly blocked the fatal spear tip. He realized that if he hadn't used mana in time to defend, that attack could have truly endangered his life. Adam Goldpixie approached Damien, who was still standing thoughtfully after the match. Adam extended his hand, indicating a desire to check Damien's internal injuries with a calculated gesture of concern. The ring on Adam's hand suddenly glowed with a magical blue light. Adam created a small pitch black blue rimmed spatial gate, astonishing Damien. From within the spatial gate, Adam pulled out an elaborately decorated wooden box. Adam opened the box lid, revealing the precious item inside for Damien to see as a gift. 5 brilliant yellow pills lay inside the box, radiating a powerful energy. Adam handed the box to Damien, explaining that these were valuable pills with the effect of healing internal injuries. Adam placed a hand on Damien's shoulder in a friendly manner, showing his expectations for his future. Damien smiled confidently, his sharp eyes responding to Adam's investment. The scene shifted to a clear blue morning, signaling the start of a new day. The next day, Damien entered a large training hall, stretching to warm up. He placed his hand on his chest, feeling that his internal injuries had almost completely disappeared overnight thanks to the medicine's effect. He walked along the rows of weapon and shield racks, his eyes gleaming with interest in the high-quality training tools. Damien smiled, ready to begin his training process at his new residence. A sudden voice rang out from behind, causing Damien to turn around with a wary gaze. A young man with purple hair stood on a high platform, arms crossed, looking down at Damien with a challenging expression. Damien narrowed his eyes, inquiring about the identity of the stranger who had just appeared. The purple-haired young man smirked, introducing himself as Pable Berman. Two other large men stepped out from both sides, standing behind Pable, forming a pincer movement. Pable stood with hands on hips along with his two teammates, looking at Damien with arrogant expressions, ready for a confrontation. Pable Berman's eyes narrowed provocatively, and unspoken challenge issued. Pable stood with his two teammates, their shadows stretching menacingly as he asserted his role in the upcoming life or death match. Damien Haxon indifferently turned his back and walked away, ignoring Pable's shouts demanding him to leave their training ground. With a smug look, Pable declared that this was a good opportunity for him to personally verify the abilities of the knights in the duchy. Pable's large teammate took a deep breath, preparing for the sparring exercise. Pable took his stance, his eyes glowing red as he focused his energy, a powerful aura emanating from his body. The ponytail-haired teammate launched himself into the air, executing a powerful aerial attack. Two wooden swords clashed, sparking as Pable braced himself to parry his teammate's furious attack. Both gritted their teeth, pouring all their strength into the confrontation, neither willing to yield. They were locked together in a tense struggle, muscles trembling from exertion. Sweat beaded on Pable's temples, his eyes flashing with a decisive glint. Suddenly changing his stance, Pable spun and delivered a tricky blow towards his opponent's head. The ponytail-haired teammate froze, eyes wide with astonishment at the unpredictable attack. Pable's wooden sword stopped directly above his teammate's head, an absolutely precise strike. The large teammate watched the match, jaw agape in astonishment at Pable's skill. Pable chuckled triumphantly, the wooden sword still lightly pressed against his opponent's forehead as an affirmation of victory. The ponytail-haired teammate bowed in acknowledgement while Pable stood with arms crossed, looking smug. The large teammate excitedly ran over, brandishing his practice sword and demanding to spar immediately. All three huddled together, discussing strategy and reinforcing their determination for the upcoming battle. Pable raised his wooden sword high, a symbol of their oath. All three chanted their slogan in unison, raising their swords to the sky, displaying an unbreakable spirit of unity. All three faces contorted into a wild, frenzied laugh, ready for any challenge. From a distance, Damien and Victor silently observed the scene, the knights' two wooden swords obstructing their view. Victor turned to look at Damien with an innocent expression, curious and not understanding what was happening. Darkness enveloped Damien's face as he clenched his fist, a feeling of despair rising. He whispered to Victor, his eyes fixed on the three shouting teammates, realizing the dire prospect of the match. Adam Goldpixie burst into hearty laughter from the balcony, showing immense amusement at the knights' somewhat ridiculous performance. Adam turned to Jael Heimlich, his smile still lingering, and memories of their conversation last night resurfaced. In the dark room, Damien bowed respectfully but firmly refused Adam's training offer. Back in the present, Adam laughed loudly, remarking that Damien Haxon was truly an interesting fellow. Adam turned to ask Jael for his assessment of Damien. Jael acknowledged Damien's talent, recalling the moment he blocked Howitz's blow with extraordinary skill. From a comprehensive perspective, Adam sat comfortably behind his desk, asking Jael about their chances of victory against House Lionbloom. Jael stood at attention, explaining that victory depended on all three of them, not just Damien's performance alone. In a luxurious room, Adam Goldpixie posed a silent question to Jael Heimlich about the knights' training situation. Jael expressed absolute confidence in the training session's outcome. At the same time, on the training ground, Damien Haxon looked at the scene before him with a disheartened expression, a leaf accidentally falling onto his cheek. He observed Pable Berman and his two teammates training clumsily and ineffectively. Damien pondered for a moment, making a decision. He sighed, rubbing his forehead with profound disappointment, while Victor stood behind him looking worried. Pable and his teammates stopped, turning towards the call with annoyance. Damien, now wearing training protective gear, walked towards them, issuing a silent challenge. Pable smirked, smugly crossing his arms and accepting the challenge he deemed ridiculous. Damien's eyes sharpened and he clarified that Pable had misunderstood his intention. Damien waved his hand, signaling for all three of them to charge simultaneously. All three knights were stunned by his arrogance. The astonishment quickly turned into rage, all three roaring as their honor was insulted. Damien stood firm, accepting their anger with absolute composure. To teach the arrogant one a lesson, all three simultaneously charged to attack Damien. Damien faced the incoming blows with a terrifying calmness. A moment later, the space became strangely silent. Pable lay sprawled on the ground, his eyes blank, not understanding what had just happened. He quickly sat up, horrified to see a teammate unconscious beside him. Pable turned around and froze when he saw both of his teammates had been knocked down. He flinched, sensing a presence right behind him. Damien stood with arms crossed, looking down at Pable with contempt, while Victor in the distance gaped in astonishment. Pable clutched his head, the harsh truth dawning on him, making him despair. Memories of the lightning-fast match 5 minutes earlier flooded back. Everything began when all three charged into attack with full fury. Damien calmly observed the first punch coming. He gently parried the Ponytail Knight's attack aside. A lightning-fast hand chop neutralized the next attack. With extraordinary speed, Damien simultaneously neutralized attacks from both sides. Pable's two teammates fell while he himself was still airborne after Damien's blow. Rage flared in Pable's eyes as he lunged forward for the final attack. Damien spun, delivering a hook punch directly to Pable's face. The force of the punch snapped Pable's head back, his consciousness fading. To end the match, Damien delivered a powerful axe kick, completely extinguishing Pable's resistance. Pable Berman stared in shock at his two fallen teammates, unable to believe that all three of them had been defeated. Damien Haxon's overwhelming figure appeared before the kneeling Pable, brushing his sleeve lightly as if the recent battle was merely a stroll. Damien stood tall, arms crossed, looking down at the three defeated men, his gaze authoritatively inquiring about who had trained them. With a fearful expression, Pable stammered that they were trained by the mid-level knight Vincenzo. Damien slightly furrowed his brow, showing deep disappointment at the quality of training a mid-level knight could provide. He issued a decisive command, demanding that the knights spar with him daily, leaving Pable stunned in astonishment. Pable scratched his head and gave a forced laugh, expressing concern that their trainer would find out if they were beaten black and blue. Damien smirked, smugly clenched his fist, and gave a menacing assurance that there would not be a single scratch on them. Pable confusedly touched his face, suddenly realizing that despite being defeated, his body was completely unharmed. Damien's sharp eyes gleamed as he began to tell an old story. Memories flooded back, recreating the image of a legendary man known by the nickname Character Corrector walking through a dark prison. His method was simple: facing a bound criminal, he unleashed a relentless barrage of blows for an entire hour. The shadow of the brutal beating stretched long on the stone wall, testament to his terrifying persistence. After countless punishments, the man looked at the victim's blood-stained hands and began to ponder. He questioned how he could punish others without endangering their lives. Through that process, he reached the realm of a master, giving birth to an ultimate technique. Back in the present, Damien stood before the three knights, revealing that it was the very technique he had just used. At Damien's explanation, the three knights bowed their heads in shame, deeply feeling their own weakness. Damien raised a finger, a simple gesture yet carrying the weight of a promise. He smiled confidently, declaring he would transform these useless bugs into true warriors within a month. Pable and his two teammates gaped, completely stunned by the unbelievable declaration. From a distance, the servant Victor looked at Damien, worriedly, not understanding what his master was planning. Just then, a ducal attendant rushed over, calling Damien's name loudly. The attendant bowed respectfully, conveying that the Duke was looking for him. At the same time, in a luxurious room, a mysterious smile appeared on Duke Adam Goldpixie's face. The door opened and Chelsea Goldpixie entered with a confident demeanor, attracting all eyes. Adam Goldpixie looked up at his daughter, a pensive gaze that did not hide his concern. Chelsea knelt on one knee before her father, followed by a large bodyguard, and formally reported her return. From behind, Adam watched his daughter kneeling on the intricately patterned rug. Vincenzo, standing to one side, smiled contentedly and welcomed Chelsea's safe return. In the meeting room, Adam sat at the head, listening as Chelsea and her bodyguard knelt to report, while Vincenzo and other knights stood solemnly. Chelsea smirked meaningfully, assuring her father that she had found a representative for the upcoming match. From behind a burly figure, Adam Goldpixie sat behind his desk, his sharp eyes assessing the newly arrived guests. Guillermo Blackwing puffed out his chest, flexed his muscles to display his strength, and roared a boastful self-introduction. Standing in a corner of the room, Vincenzo and another knight whispered to each other, recognizing the identity of the notorious mercenary. A brutal image flashed by, depicting Guillermo with fiery eyes wielding an axe, slaughtering enemies on the battlefield. Adam smirked, a flicker of amusement in his eyes as he heard of Guillermo's reputation. Adam acknowledged Guillermo's reputation, causing the mercenary to laugh with delight at being known by such a prominent figure. Chelsea Goldpixie entered the room, boldly declaring to her father that Guillermo had sworn loyalty to her. Chelsea confidently gestured towards Guillermo, assuring her father that this was the warrior capable of defeating their opponent. The knights in the room whispered again, admitting that Guillermo's strength might have surpassed even perfection. Adam raised a hand to his chin, his expression becoming pensive and awkward at this news. Chelsea appeared confused by her father's reaction, She hadn't yet introduced the second representative. Chelsea and Guillermo exchanged a glance showing their alliance and determination. The door burst open and Damien Haxon entered with a confident demeanor, interrupting the discussion. Chelsea's red eyes narrowed, surprise and displeasure clearly visible on her face. Chelsea confronted her father, questioning why he had chosen someone else when he had asked her to wait. With a provocative smile, Chelsea suggested her father change the representative immediately. Adam closed his eyes, lost in thought at his daughter's challenging request. Chelsea angrily pointed at Damien, vehemently questioning her father about choosing an unknown person. From Damien's perspective, Chelsea appeared full of indignation, disdaining his presence. Standing behind Damien, Guillermo crossed his arms and sneered, clearly showing contempt. Damien's eyes narrowed. He quietly assessed the situation and Guillermo's character. Adam clasped his hands together decisively, making his final decision. Adam turned to explain to Vincenzo, startling the knight with the information that Damien had blocked Sir Howitz's attack. Chelsea burst into a scornful laugh, thinking her father was just making excuses not to acknowledge her achievement. Adam's patience shattered, his eyes sharpened, warning his daughter about her insolent attitude in front of guests. Chelsea raised her hand, feigning an apology sarcastically due to fatigue after a long journey. Damien quietly observed, recognizing the deep animosity between the Gold Pixie father and daughter. Adam raised his hand, signaling an end to the argument to discuss the matter with others. Guillermo suddenly burst into an arrogant laugh, drawing the attention of the entire room. The mercenary turned to Chelsea, suggesting that men do not need words to decide. Adam and an elderly advisor standing beside him looked over, displeased with Guillermo's insolence. Guillermo's large figure loomed over Damien in undisguised intimidation as he proposed a battle to decide the stronger one. Chelsea yelled angrily, trying to stop Guillermo's impulsive and reckless action. Duke Adam Goldpixie nodded in agreement, while Chelsea was startled by the turn of events. Damien Haxon's sharp eyes analyzed the Duke's implicit challenge. With a confident smile, Damien made a different proposal instead of a formal match. Guillermo Blackwing extended his hand blankly, not understanding Damien's intention. To prove his strength, Damien provocatively waved his hand, proposing an immediate unarmed test of strength with Guillermo. Duke Adam's eyes narrowed, focusing intently on the impending confrontation. Guillermo laughed loudly in mockery while grasping Damien's hand, who responded with a sneer. Damien faced the threat with a cold smile, his eyes glinting with deadly danger. Guillermo's smile widened arrogantly, a silent challenge. Rage flared. Guillermo poured strength into his hand, his eyes flashing with a fiery red light, intending to crush Damien's hand. Guillermo's eyes blazed, showing his intent to use brute force to end the test of strength. Suddenly Damien spun around, using Guillermo's own force to lift the giant into the air. With a swift movement, Damien slammed Guillermo onto the floor. Duke Adam, the old advisor, and Vincenzo simultaneously showed expressions of extreme shock. Damien stood upright, calmly dusting off his hands over Guillermo's motionless body, while Chelsea stared, unable to believe her eyes. The old advisor narrowed his eyes, a flicker of admiration appearing at the masterful technique. In his mind, the recent events replayed clearly. Guillermo Blackwing had made the first move. However, Damien Haxon had used his opponent's own strength against him, and with a perfect technique he had slammed the giant onto the floor. Damien glanced over his shoulder with a smug smile, asserting his superiority. The old advisor's eyes turned sharp, realizing the situation could spiral out of control. Humiliated, Guillermo struggled to his feet, glaring at Damien with eyes burning with resentment. Damien calmly looked down, sarcastically commenting on his opponent's endurance. Rage erupted. Guillermo gripped his axe handle and dark energy began to pour from his body. He abruptly drew two colossal battle axes, roaring a murderous threat. Chelsea screamed in panic, trying to stop Guillermo's insane action. Having lost all reason, Guillermo charged, swinging both axes down with the intent to cleave Damien in two. Guillermo's attack was suddenly blocked by a green energy wall. Guillermo's frenzied face turned into extreme astonishment as he realized he had been stopped. From behind, the old advisor intervened, radiating an overwhelming aura to prevent bloodshed. He roared a silent command, his entire body enveloped in green energy, his hand gripping the staff tightly. The advisor's eyes became deadly, one milky white eye exuding pure killing intent. Under immense pressure, Guillermo strained to endure, completely suppressed by the advisor's aura. Damien Haxon looked at the collapsing Guillermo with silent admiration, recognizing his opponent's hidden strength. Chelsea Goldpixie gritted her teeth, her face full of embarrassment and anger at the warning. Goldpixie Advisor 1 gripped his sword hilt, his cold eyes delivering a final warning, allowing no further transgression. Completely suppressed, Guillermo Blackwing knelt panting, his axe lying haphazardly beside him. Adam Goldpixie interlaced his fingers, a gesture of satisfaction as order was restored. With an amused expression, Adam stood up along with his advisor, speaking as if he had just noticed the chaos. Standing behind the powerful table, Adam delivered his judgment, directing his gaze towards Damien and Chelsea. Vincenzo unexpectedly voiced his objection, his face clearly showing displeasure at the Duke's decision. He pointed towards Guillermo loudly, arguing that Damien had taken advantage in an unfair fight. Adam narrowed his eyes, listening to the objection, his initial amusement gradually fading. To support the argument, Chelsea slammed her hand on the table, demanding a formal duel to determine their true strength. Adam leaned forward, his voice sharp as he ordered his daughter to stop. Despite the command, Chelsea desperately screamed, trying to sway her father. Adam's rage erupted. He slammed his hand on the table, an authoritative aura shaking the entire room. Chelsea froze, her eyes wide with horror at her father's anger. Completely subdued, she turned and bowed deeply, a silent apology. Vincenzo frowned helplessly, watching his attempt to object be suppressed. Amidst the tense atmosphere, a hand was raised, drawing everyone's attention in the room. Damien Haxon offered a calm smile, raising his hand to his ear as if asking if he could interject. With an open gesture, he declared his acceptance of the challenge, leaving Chelsea speechless with shock. Adam Goldpixie raised an eyebrow, a new spark of interest flickering in his eyes. Leaving the mansion, Damien walked calmly while his servant Victor scurried after him, grumbling anxiously as he went. Damien stopped, pointing towards a sign with a hammer and anvil confirming their destination. Both stood before the large wooden door of the blacksmith's forge. Memories of Adam's offer flooded back. He would have a new sword forged to compensate for Damien's broken weapon. The door opened and a blacksmith with a white cloth tied around his head looked startled at the uninvited guest. Victor stepped forward, explaining on behalf of his master that they were here by the Duke's order to retrieve a sword. The blacksmith Goldpixie Smith one nodded, gesturing for them to follow, leading the way deeper into the workshop. Victor and Damien followed the blacksmith through a corridor displaying countless glittering weapons and armor. While Victor marveled at the expensive weapons, Damien casually glanced around, seemingly searching for something else. Suddenly, Damien's gaze stopped, drawn by something. He approached a weapon rack where a special sword lay separated from the others. The blacksmith smiled, recognizing Damien's attention, and began to introduce the unique sword. The blacksmith presented a forgotten sword, explaining that its owner had to leave suddenly. With a knowing smile, Damien made a sharp observation about the sword's material, stunning the blacksmith. The image of a legendary swordsman from the past, sword musician, appeared wielding a similar sword that radiated green energy. Ignoring the blacksmith's worried expression, Damien decisively declared he would take this sword. Damien's eyes sharpened as he sensed the unique properties of the metal on the blade. Damien lifted the sword, a gentle blue energy radiating from it as he asked about the weapon's name. The blacksmith hesitated, trying to recall before revealing the sword's name. He stated that its former owner had intended to call it the 1,000-mile sword. The forge door suddenly opened, interrupting the conversation. Footsteps echoed as a woman in high heels entered. Damien and Victor turned to look. A bespectacled maid, Rebecca, bowed formally, two burly guards standing behind her as an unspoken warning. Rebecca introduced herself as Chelsea's maid, her eyes behind her glasses glinting shrewdly. She conveyed her mistress's invitation for a meeting, but Damien coldly waved his hand in refusal. Two escort knights stood behind Rebecca as she continued to persuade Damien. Rebecca sneered, offering a vague suggestion that this meeting would be beneficial to him. Damien narrowed his eyes, analyzing her seductive intent. After a moment of consideration, he decided to accept the invitation to assess the situation, making Victor behind him appear worried. He nodded in decisive agreement, gesturing for Rebecca to lead the way. They were led to a luxurious, secluded restaurant nestled among lush green trees. Rebecca led Damien through the splendid corridor, explaining that the entire place had been reserved for the meeting. She stopped, smiling as she announced that the entire restaurant had been cleared to welcome him. Damien remained silent, his gaze fixed on the maid, his vigilance unwavering. Rebecca stopped before a large door, gesturing for him to enter. Damien cautiously pushed the door open to look inside, preparing for whatever awaited him. He immediately paused as a strange scent and an overwhelming surge of purple energy emanated from within. Through the reflection on the pouring wine glass, Chelsea looked directly at Damien with a smug expression. In the vast room tinged with purple energy, Chelsea sat alone, gesturing for Damien to take the opposite seat. She raised her wine glass, her red eyes burning with defiance, a silent greeting to Damien Haxon. Damien sat down, facing Chelsea directly, his gaze cutting straight to the point. He crossed his arms over his chest, a gesture showing impatience and demanding she state her purpose. Chelsea shrugged with a smug look, smiling as she laid out her condition. Her eyes turned cold as she presented her main demand: Damien must withdraw from his representative position. She explained that this was not because she distrusted Guillermo but to preserve strength for the greater battle ahead. Damien crossed his arms, calmly listening to Chelsea's proposal. In the luxurious setting, Chelsea presented her offer, confident that Damien would accept. With a smug smile, Chelsea scorned Damien's origins, believing she had him cornered. Damien's eyes sharpened, disgusted by her arrogance. Chelsea continued her argument, outlining a bright future if he followed her. She placed her hand on the hourglass, a silent warning that time for decision was running out. Chelsea's red eyes gleamed with cunning as she prepared to unleash her scheme. She flipped the hourglass, initiating the manipulation. The sand grains began to fall, marking the moment magic was unleashed. An enchanting stream of purple magical energy emanated from Chelsea, engulfing the entire room. Damien bowed his head as the magical energy enveloped him, seemingly subdued. He lifted his face, a defiant smile shattering Chelsea's illusion. Chelsea flinched, the confidence on her face crumbling at the unexpected resistance. Damien smirked, his eyes mocking her surprise. An image appeared depicting a hooded figure controlling a puppet, exposing the nature of manipulative magic. Memories flooded back, showing that Damien had recognized the magical smoke even before entering the room. He had been vigilant from the very first moment, fully aware of the trap. Damien raised his hand, revealing that he was not only immune but also in control of the situation. A glowing symbol on the back of his hand completely absorbed the purple magical energy. Damien stood up, walking towards Chelsea, who remained stunned in her seat. Panic was evident on Chelsea's face as she stammered, unable to comprehend why her plan had failed. Damien turned away, taking decisive steps towards the door, demonstrating his rejection. Chelsea screamed in despair, unable to accept the rejection. Damien's back exuded a lonely yet resolute aura. He leaned his head against a pillar, his shoulders heavy with his objective. Chelsea's expression shifted from despair to stunned disbelief upon hearing his answer. Damien turned his back on her decisively, leaving after delivering his message to his opponent. Chelsea gritted her teeth, her failure transforming into simmering rage. She watched Damien's receding back, hatred surging within her. Changing tactics, Chelsea sprang to her feet, shifting from seduction to direct threat. Her face contorted with fury as the threat was uttered. Chelsea's rage erupted. She declared she would destroy everything Damien cherished. In response to the threat against his family, Damien lunged, pinning Chelsea to the table in a flash. He seized Chelsea's neck, his hand tightening as she struggled in horror and pain. In response to the threat against his family, Damien Haxon grabbed Chelsea Goldpixie's hair with one hand, his shadow falling over her in a menacing image. The noise caused Chelsea's two knights, Chelsea Knight 1 and Chelsea Knight 2, to burst through the door. Realizing the situation, Chelsea Knight 1 roared a challenge, lunging towards Damien to protect their mistress. Chelsea struggled in vain, her mouth agape with pain and fear. A sphere of incense shattered on the carpet, its alluring magic completely ineffective against Damien. Without hesitation, Damien swung his hand, creating streaks of blue light that neutralized both knights before they could react. Chelsea Knight 1 froze, horrified by Damien's unimaginable power. Damien departed, leaving behind two fallen knights and a dazed Chelsea. He coldly issued a warning, indicating that their wounds were not fatal if treated promptly. Chelsea sat stunned on the bed, her hands still clutching her throat, her eyes fixed on Damien's retreating back. Damien threw back a threat, asserting that instant death would be too merciful for her. He walked away decisively, leaving Chelsea and her defeated subordinates in heavy silence. A wicked smile full of the promise of revenge formed on Damien's lips as he left. Chelsea trembled, horror and humiliation evident on her face. The two knights remained kneeling in pain as the room door opened. Rebecca, Chelsea's maid, entered and froze at the chaotic scene. She rushed to her mistress's side, asking questions with a worried expression. Chelsea's face contorted with anger. She gritted her teeth, vowing to kill Damien at all costs. In a fit of rage, Chelsea roared a name. Mustang Fury, a short, stout man, rushed in, breathlessly bowing in obedience. Chelsea vented her anger on Mustang Fury, questioning the failure of the alluring magic. Unable to bear her mistress's fury, Chelsea swung her hand and slapped Mustang Fury directly across the face. She sat down, demanding to know the whereabouts of the representative fighter Guillermo Blackwing. Chelsea was furious to learn that Guillermo was drinking while the deathmatch was about to take place. She turned to question Mustang Fury about Guillermo's chances of winning against Damien. Mustang Fury quickly reassured Chelsea, guaranteeing Guillermo's strength and promising to bring victory to the Yulon family. Chelsea narrowed her eyes, growling a threat to Mustang Fury's life if his promise did not come true. Mustang Fury could only bow his head in fearful obedience. Time passed and dusk fell outside the window. From the rooftop of the opposite building, Damien looked down at the city view. His gaze was resolute and cold, ready for what was to come. Night fell, and at an armory a young armory master dozed amidst piles of weapons. Damien sat in the armory carefully inspecting a sword, choosing a weapon for tomorrow's match. Damien Haxon's eyes flashed with recognition as he thought of the Yulan organization and the Dark Mages. In his mind, the image of a smug Chelsea Gold Pixie appeared linked to Guillermo Blackwing swinging an axe in a cloud of dark smoke. Damien lightly touched his sword's blade and a circle of blue energy began to converge. He channeled magic into the sword and a wave of blue energy erupted, shaking the entire room. Nearby, the armory master dozed off completely unaware. With a determined gaze, Damien rested his sword on the ground, deciding to use action instead of explanation. In the arena, Guillermo Blackwing stomped his foot on the ground, displaying his muscular strength. He let out a roar of intimidation, muscles rippling beneath his armor. Guillermo flexed his massive arm, an act of pure power display. From the stands, Pabel Berman and his two teammates watched with worried expression. Pabel frowned, stating that Guillermo would likely win based on his reputation. Pabel's two teammates trembled, expressing desperate hope that they would be freed from Damien. Horrifying memories of a one-sided beating from a Damien with a demonic smile flooded Pabel's mind. Pabel sighed, conflict evident on his face as he both wanted Damien to lose and couldn't believe it. Damien entered the arena, casually rotating his shoulders to warm up. Guillermo squinted at his opponent from the other side of the arena. The small figure of Damien Haxon faced the massive physique of Guillermo Blackwing in the vast arena. Guillermo smirked savagely, not seeing Damien as a threat at all. In response, Damien continued his indifferent warm-up, causing Guillermo to feel even more contempt. Adam Goldpixie, the Duke, sat down in his ceremonial chair, signaling his arrival. He sat on the throne, declaring that the winner of this match would become the representative. Chelsea glanced at her father, her eyes sharp. She cast a challenging look towards her father, confident that Guillermo would win. Adam Goldpixie picked up a white handkerchief. He dropped the white handkerchief, signaling the start of the match. Guillermo summoned a colossal double-bladed battle axe enveloped in purple dark energy. He pointed at Damien, issuing an arrogant warning. Guillermo tightened his grip on the axe handle and the dark energy surged more intensely. With a wild roar, Guillermo charged forward, swinging the colossal axe with the intent to finish off his opponent immediately. The colossal axe blade struck down on Damien, who remained still with an unchanged expression. Damien raised a finger and a swirl of blue energy appeared. The colossal axe blade was blocked by just one of Damien's fingers, the dark energy repelled by a stream of blue light. Guillermo froze, his eyes wide with astonishment at the unbelievable sight. Guillermo lunged like a beast, his colossal figure filling the frame, ready to crush Damien. With two battle axes, Guillermo landed powerfully, preparing for a brutal attack. Guillermo gasped, his face contorted in painful disbelief at the recent attack. Chelsea covered her mouth in extreme shock, while Lady Chelsea's maid standing beside her was equally horrified. Adam Goldpixie smiled with amusement at the unexpected technique, while Goldpixie's advisor looked doubtful. Guillermo roared a curse, charging forward in blind fury at his opponent's strange magic. From Guillermo's position, circles of blue energy emanated from Damien, signaling another attack. An invisible energy strike hit Guillermo, forcing him to brace himself in pain. Guillermo's face contorted with anger and confusion as a streak of black blood flowed from his arm. Another energy attack struck Guillermo directly in the face, snapping his head back. Guillermo's face was distorted by the extreme impact force. He staggered backward, one hand still clutching the axe while the other tried to maintain balance. With eyes burning with rage and blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, Guillermo let out a silent roar of threat. Looking at his opponent from a distance, Damien raised his sword to the sky, declaring the end of the prelude. Blue energy converged around Damien's sword, forming a powerful entity. The energy transformed into a colossal sword of light, ready to strike down. Guillermo looked up in horror as the colossal energy sword plunged directly towards him. The colossal energy sword descended, engulfing Guillermo in a destructive explosion of light. All witnesses were stunned. Adam Goldpixie sprang from his seat. Pabel Berman and Chelsea Goldpixie gasped in astonishment. Guillermo convulsed, his throat constricting in pain. Overwhelmed by pure energy from within, Guillermo bent over and vomited a stream of dark viscous fluid. The thick black liquid spread across the arena ground, witnessed by Damien. Adam Goldpixie and his advisor looked at each other, trying to comprehend the strange phenomenon unfolding. Chelsea's smugness vanished, replaced by a look of horror and extreme disbelief. Guillermo collapsed, his hands propped up in his own puddle of dark viscous fluid. He groaned in pain, his body convulsing uncontrollably. Guillermo's hands trembled as he tried to support his collapsing body. Damien looked down at his writhing opponent with cold eyes, a contemptuous smirk revealing the exposed truth. Guillermo lay curled on the ground, enveloped in black smoke, the figure of a defeated man. Damien delivered his final judgment, his gaze deeply etching Guillermo's falsity. Adam Goldpixie and his advisor repeated Damien's words in astonishment. From a distance, the armory master and other knights stared at the scene with unbelievable expressions. Damien gripped the sword hilt, confirming his accusation with a decisive gesture. Damien Haxon stood over Guillermo Blackwing's unconscious body, coldly declaring the defeated man's dark nature. Amidst the crowd of spectators, the nobles and Chelsea Goldpixie's maids were stunned by the shocking accusation. Confusion spread through the crowd, fearing the consequences if the church discovered this scandal. In the stands, Adam Goldpixie squinted, pondering Damien's words. Adam questioned Damien, his hand gripping the chair armrest, and Damien bowed his head, admitting he had known the truth all along. Damien's eyes were sharp and cold, concealing a meticulously calculated plan. Adam gritted his teeth, gripping the chair armrest until his knuckles turned white as he realized he had been deceived. Damien revealed his true purpose, to expose the mastermind behind it, with Olan Demishi's image appearing like a ghost. Turning back to Chelsea, Damien delivered the final accusation. Singled out, Chelsea flinched, her entire body stiff with shock. She turned to her father, frantically denying the accusation, while Adam covered his face in utter despair. Adam gritted his teeth, his disappointment quickly turning into rage as he realized the harsh truth. Adam's eyes widened, flaring with anger as he realized his own daughter's betrayal. Rage erupted. Adam pointed directly at his daughter, and an order for her arrest was given. Immediately, 2 Goldpixie knights rushed forward, roughly escorting the screaming Guillermo. Chelsea watched in horror as the knights advanced towards her, realizing that her escape route was blocked. In desperation, Chelsea ordered her 2 personal guards to block the knight's path. Chelsea's guards and Goldpixie's soldiers clashed, and the clang of weapons echoed loudly. Adam sighed wearily, then called out the name of his knight captain. Adam ordered Jael Heimlich, his loyal knight captain, to personally arrest Chelsea. Jael Heimlich stepped forward, his imposing figure exuding an invisible pressure that brought the skirmish to a halt. Chelsea's 2 guards immediately formed a living shield to protect her. Jael Heimlich's eyes flashed with a green light, and a powerful surge of energy was unleashed. With just a flick of his hand, Jael created a surge of energy that easily repelled Chelsea's 2 guards. Chelsea's 2 guards realized in horror the superior strength of their opponent. One guard urged Chelsea to flee, attempting to create a final chance for her survival. Damien merely watched, his hand casually resting on his sword hilt, showing pity for a futile effort. Jael charged like a storm, his slashes forming an impenetrable green energy shield. A streak of green light flashed right before Chelsea's eyes as she tried to flee. A piercing scream echoed, and Chelsea collapsed, clutching her head as her black hair temporarily turned green under the impact of an invisible attack. She gasped for breath, her hair returned to black, but the horror remained etched deep in her eyes. Chelsea lifted her head despairingly, looking at her 2 guards who had fallen before her. One of her loyal guards lay on the ground, a deep gash on his shoulder, a testament to complete defeat. Hatred and horror contorted Chelsea Goldpixie's face, her fiery red eyes blazing. She fell to the floor, her mouth agape in a silent scream, horrified by the 2 bodies lying before her. From Jael Heimlich's perspective, Chelsea appeared small and helpless, surrounded by a menacing green aura of energy. The image of Jael Heimlich in his full armor reflected in Chelsea's horrified eyes a silent warning that she could not escape. Jael Heimlich's armored legs stood towering before Chelsea, his overwhelming presence leaving her no escape. A knight, Ernst Howitz, suddenly appeared, his eyes revealing clear shock at the sight. In desperation, Chelsea turned towards Ernst, screaming for help in vain. Ernst gritted his teeth, his internal struggle evident as he called out his lady's name. To protect Chelsea, Ernst Howitz bravely stood in front of her, using his staff to block Jael Heimlich's path. Damien Haxon observed from afar, a sneer appearing on his lips as he disdained Ernst's reckless action. Jael Heimlich looked directly at Ernst, his icy gaze delivering a warning about his loyalty. Jael's sharp gaze emphasized that the Duke highly valued Ernst. But Jael also issued a silent ultimatum: if Ernst insisted on protecting Chelsea, he would pay the price. Despite the threat, Ernst poured all his strength into his staff, preparing for an uneven confrontation. Ernst's face was extremely tense, and he let out a final roar of defiance. With a cold frown, Jael declared the verdict with his eyes and swung his sword, a streak of green light slashing down. Ernst trembled, sweat pouring down as he faced an irresistible force. He collapsed, his resistance completely extinguished. Ernst fell to his knees in defeat, his staff dropping beside him, Chelsea watching the scene in disbelief. Immediately 2 gold pixie guards rushed in, restraining the fiercely struggling Chelsea. Being escorted away, Chelsea desperately turned towards her father Adam Goldpixie, who was seated on his throne, and pleaded for her innocence. Adam coldly dismissed his daughter's plea, a silent command for her to be quiet. He looked down at the chaotic arena where Chelsea's actions had tarnished the honor of the entire family. Adam's face contorted with disappointment and disgust, and he declared that bringing her into this family was the biggest mistake of his life. A tear rolled down Chelsea's cheek as her father's words pierced her heart like a knife. Unable to bear it any longer, Adam ordered the guards to gag her and drag her out of his sight. Chelsea continued to scream and struggle while her hands were tied behind her back. A black-gloved hand clamped over her mouth, silencing her final cries. Being dragged away, Chelsea could only mumble in vain, witnessed by the stunned nobles. Damien Haxon witnessed the scene from behind the noble's shock, further highlighting his composure. Chelsea's eyes were wide open, full of resentment and helplessness as she was gagged and escorted away. A satisfied, triumphant smile appeared on Damien's face. His plan had succeeded perfectly. A few days later, inside a dark, cold prison, sounds of pain echoed, signaling the tragic fate of the defeated. A painful scream rang out as a red-hot iron bar was pressed against the flesh of a bound prisoner. The torturer held the instrument firmly while Jael Heimlich stood overseeing with an icy expression. Exhausted, the prisoner collapsed, revealing the final information about Chelsea's conspiracy. Jael Heimlich waved his hand decisively, signaling the torturer to prepare for the next person. Jael closed his eyes, the confessions only further confirming Chelsea's betrayal. He turned away, his gaze heavy with disappointment, towards the dungeon. In a dark cell, Chelsea lay curled up on the cold stone floor, her body ragged. Her fingers clutched the ground, trembling with resentment and despair. Chelsea struggled to her knees, her eyes burning red with hatred as she stared into the void. The image of her father's cold face, Adam Goldpixie, appeared in her mind, igniting the flames of resentment. Memories flooded back, taking her to the image of a radiant young Chelsea holding a wreath with innocent hope. The little girl held out the wreath towards her father's back, longing for a word of recognition. Her only reply was indifference as Adam Goldpixie's hand brushed the gift away. The wreath fell to the ground, shattered like the little girl's tender heart. Adam's cold gaze in her memory twisted like a knife into Chelsea's current pain. Returning to reality, Chelsea collapsed, her tear-streaked face screaming in silence. The clang of bars echoed as a female jailer slid a plate of food into the cell. The female jailer placed the plate of bread on the floor and then stepped back, maintaining a safe distance. Chelsea glanced at the plate of food with disdain, then turned her face away in silence. Her dirty hand trembled as it reached out and grabbed the piece of bread. She brought the bread to her mouth, taking a large, ravenous bite. Despite the humiliation, an intense determination flared in her eyes. She had to survive at all costs. From outside the bars, the female jailer silently observed a complex glint flashing in her eyes. At the same time, in another part of the mansion, Damien Haxon entered a luxurious room, massaging his shoulder after his training session. He paused for a moment, feeling the fatigue after a long day. A plump servant bowed respectfully, informing him that his master was waiting for him. Damien was momentarily surprised, then quickly regained his composure and followed the servant. Red wine was poured into an elegant glass, shimmering under the lights. In the living room, Adam Goldpixie sat opposite Damien, gesturing for him to try the wine. Damien took a sip, nodding in appreciation of the wine's excellent flavor. Adam smiled contentedly, also taking a sip from his own glass. Adam offered a plate of cheese, inviting Damien to try the exquisite accompaniment. Damien looked at the offered plate of cheese, a silent exchange occurring between the two powerful men. Damien politely accepted a piece of cheese from Adam Goldpixie. While listening, Damien calmly brought the piece of cheese to his mouth. In the luxurious room, Adam began to explain his decision to Damien. Adam rubbed his forehead, his face full of disappointment as he announced a heavy loss which surprised Damien slightly. The Duke emphasized the complete failure to capture any dark mages. In Damien's mind, images of Olan Demichi and Chelsea's maid who had escaped briefly appeared. Damien remained calm, accepted the situation, and redirected the conversation, asking about Chelsea's testimony. Adam shook his head, admitting Chelsea's resilience even when facing torture. Damien quietly took a sip of wine, absorbing the information calmly. Adam put down his wine glass, his gaze lowered, and began to tell a more personal story. The candle flickered in the darkness, signaling a transition to a melancholic story. Memories flooded back, revealing a scene of Chelsea's mother, a commoner, holding the little girl's hand as they stood before a large door. In the memory, little Chelsea looked up at her mother with innocent eyes, holding her hand tightly. A younger Adam appeared, his face full of shock and disbelief at the humiliating truth. Chelsea's mother and daughter fearfully peeked from behind a door, sensing danger. Abandoned Chelsea's mother collapsed to her knees before the slammed door while the little girl stood by helplessly. Back in the present, Adam's face was heavy with sadness and regret as he recalled his cruel decision. Damien continued to listen silently, his gaze fixed on the Duke, who was lost in memories. The memory continued with a tragic scene: little Chelsea embracing the body of her mother who had died from the plague. Surviving alone amidst poverty, Chelsea's exhausted eyes still shone with extraordinary resilience. Adam covered his face, letting out a bitter laugh mocking his unusual weakness in the past. Damien offered a profound conjecture about Adam's motives, his eyes full of contemplation. Adam sat up straight, pondering Damien's question, seemingly questioning himself. Adam looked up, speculating that Chelsea's actions were the only way she knew to gain his recognition. Adam sighed, looking at the empty wine glass, regretting a life his daughter could have had. Adam shook his head, admitting he had said too much, and ended the emotional story. The conversation was suddenly interrupted by an urgent call from outside. An attendant rushed into the room, breaking the quiet atmosphere with a panicked expression. The attendant stood before the two men, stammering out a horrifying piece of news about Lady Chelsea. Adam's calm gaze shattered, replaced by extreme shock and horror. At the same time, in the prison, two guards froze, terrified by the sight inside the cell. Reflected in the fear-contracted pupils of a guard was the image of a hanging body. Chelsea's body hung in mid-air, her bare feet dangling, marking a tragic end.